Just bring the video on council.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Just now I finished telling Mother's Day stories. Funny. Should be all good? Look at that, it's 10 o'clock as well.
Okay. Well, good morning everybody to the General Committee meeting. I declare the meeting open. I'd begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet, the Gubbi or Cubbi people. Pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We have an apology from Councillor Joe Jurisovic. Do we have any presentations?
No, not today.
Thank you. And the first item up this morning is the proposed local law amendments advertising devices. Now it's proposed that these amendments go out to the local law, go out for public consultation, and the staff have made a recommendation. It's very important that we reach a consensus on what we think should go out for public consultation. So, councillors, have any questions for staff? Ingrid?
I'm going to start with something that's not completely a question. Anita, on Friday when we were working through the local law, we discovered there appeared to be an error in the local law compared to the plain English version that you had written for us. Can you explain that to councillors?
Yeah, so it's with regard to shopping centres and what we are proposing. The intent is that we allow 10 square metres per frontage of building to internal car parks and to street frontages. In addition, 10 square metres per outward facing tenancy as well on a sliding scale. On review of the local law provisions, that intent wasn't captured 100%, so I've spoken to the lawyers. We've got a new clause redrafted just to ensure that intent is clarified, so that it is 10 square metres on each frontage. Yeah.
So, yes.
No, on that, the current wording is the sign face area of an individual device must not exceed 4 square metres. So is that still the intention, that individually they cannot be more than 4 square metres? However, the total area can be 10 square metres.
That's right, that's correct. So there's no change proposed to the individual sign face area for shopping centres. It was just the total permitted on each of the building frontages and for each tenancy.
As I understand it, and please make sure that I'm right, the way the actual legal words were written failed to include the fact that the shopping centre could have signage of the shopping centre on each frontage, and it gave the impression it was just one total for the whole shopping
correct
centre.
So the wording has been changed to capture that the intent is 10 square metres for each of those building frontages to the car park and or street frontage. So it's plus.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. So, now, may I?
Yes. So when you say it's been changed, we'll need to pick that up today.
Yes.
I've only just printed it off, but yes, we've got it here. So there's
maybe
a general.
Kathy could type it up as.
So it's not an amendment made by us; it's actually a correction.
Yeah, but it can go.
It needs to be.
It needs to be included, maybe in the original motion.
Yep. So it only came in 5 minutes ago.
I'll ask another question.
Yes.
Right, while that's going on. I note that in the shopping centre conditions, there are no size restrictions for the pylon signs. Can you explain the thinking behind that? Is that because the civic sign's already awful big?
No, so the pylon provisions would revert back to the general pylon provisions. So if you go back to the criteria,
okay.
And so that would apply, which is a 5 metre height limit and 4 square metre.
But it's just
frontage.
not specified under.
No, there's no change to those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to have some questions to say.
Are we right?
Councillor, so probably the best way to deal with this is to include the issue we just talked about. in the original motion to be moved today, and then we can make amendments from there as we work through each of the issues. I'm just getting that organised.
So just while there's not a whole lot of dead space in our blockbuster,
Schedule 10.
so just clarifying, I was going to be Anita, the current requirement under the plan was a $920 sign application. The proposal coming back here is that a minimum application fee goes down to $150 for 3 signs, is that correct? So that they won't require both, so in terms of those people who have to apply, there'll be a significant reduction in the cost. But the flip side of that is that there will be an annual licence under the bylaw, which will be something that's introduced, but that if they're compliant, you can get a 30% discount off that fee.
Correct.
Right.
So the intent there is, yes, to recognise how long it takes for us to assess the application and provide an incentive for fewer signs, lesser fee, just the standard minimum fee, and then that would require, any approval would require an annual fee if they can demonstrate compliance. So they would need to issue a compliance declaration. They would get a 30% discount if it's done, they're complying and paid on time.
And further to that, if they're currently complying, will they have to pay an initial licence application approval fee?
No, so any existing businesses with compliant signage that would require approval ordinarily under the local law will receive an approval
At no cost.
At no cost and without application.
Yeah.
They would just need to then be issued with an annual renewal fee.
Yeah, while we're waiting for the changes to be typed up, I wonder if, through the chair, if we could ask Jamie to outline where he's at with the audit across the Shire, how many properties he's done, how many more to do, and what the repercussions have been to his audit so far.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently just finished the Homemaker Centre, acres, and I'm moving down Mary Street Road and onto the river area as well, straight after that. Once I've done that, I'll head out to the Perugian area, continue out there, and once I've finished out there, we're looking at a bit more hinterland with Cooroy.
So what areas have you done though already, please?
Sorry, so I've already done Tawantin, Noosa Heads, which includes Hastings Street and Noosa Junction, Sunshine Beach area, and a good part of Noosaville at the moment.
Okay.
So still got a little bit to go in respect to the coastal area, and then head out to the hinterland a bit more after that.
And I understand that thus far something over 80% of properties are found to be compliant anyway.
Yeah, correct.
And of the 20% that weren't, are you finding generally people are willing to be compliant to bring their signage into?
Well, there's some businesses that act immediately. I mean, we deal with each individual business requirements as in regards to how long they've had their signs up there for, how much time they may need to reduce the amount of signs and replace the signs altogether. So we talk to the business owners in regards to what kind of time frame you may need, as long as it's a reasonable time frame, and we work with them on that basis, basically. So yeah, we do get some people that are immediately onto that, and others just need a bit more time. So we're looking at some that have got 6 months, some are closer to a year, where they need to just get those finances together again to be able to do what we're asking them to do, basically.
But we're giving them a good deal of tolerance, obviously.
Yes, definitely a good deal of tolerance, correct. Yep. And we do let them know that. It's just that some businesses say, oh, well, I'm going to have to do it anyway, I might as well just do it now. So, whereas other ones are saying, yeah, I'm going to definitely need some extra time on this one. So, we've given up to a year on some of them as well. So, a good deal of tolerance and a lot of follow-up on those, yeah.
Frank.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. The cost of some of those things
Yeah.
to many thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And we know how tough it is out there. Question, at the moment, my understanding is the sandwich boards are allowable, one sandwich board
Currently,
per
yeah.
business. Yeah.
I might just ask also, just a general question regarding shops that are along the street. Is there a change to the signage rules proposed here for regular shops?
No, not in terms of permanent signage. So
Yeah.
they still individual sign face areas 4 square metres,
Yeah.
and the total maximum on a sliding scale of 0.75 square metres per linear metre of frontage is maintained.
Right.
It would just be whether they had any of the proposed temporary signs which are proposed to be prohibited, such as an A-frame or flag, which we're proposing to prohibit.
Yeah.
I might just, we're still waiting, so Anita or Jamie or Glenn, can someone talk to why it is that you think that A-frames should be removed? What are the problems with A-frames? Obviously there's aesthetic, there's also dangers in terms of cluttering footpaths and that sort of thing. You want to talk to that?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, if we're going to have a debate on
No, I'm not asking, I'm just asking the staff's opinion as to why they're making a recommendation. It's not a debate.
You open the door.
It's up to the
your
chair.
opinion.
Up to the chair.
It's a question for staff. I'll allow the question.
So in terms of what was causing the greatest visual clutter within the streetscapes in Noosa, and that increase in terms of signage, probably the 3 main culprits in that were the temporary signs, which create a lot of visual clutter, which is the A-frames and the teardrops, and then weekends and either side of weekends the real estate pointer signs. What's happened there is that they've multiplied with people exceeding the allowable number of 1 per tenancy, and it's meant to be placed on the tenancy itself, not in public land. So it's being placed on public land, and there may be in, what did you say today, 50% of cases have more than 1 A-frame sign. So there's a compliance issue there. And I guess in terms of that amenity, particularly along some of our gateways, such as Noosa Eumundi Road, it's quite visual and it has a huge impact in terms of it's quite detrimental to the amenity of the Shire. And then, Jamie, you found public liability issues with trip hazards.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's a big one.
And
yeah.
being placed in the footpath street network, you've got to navigate sometimes walking down the street to go around these signs.
Yeah. And just the constant follow-up and battle to keep people on top of that as well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, just on that question too, in regards to if we're asking about the sort of implications of what these signs do, the real estate pointer signs, I believe a bit of a hot topic. Would you say that was a visual clutter type arrangement or actual safety, or is it just the fact that they're just getting everywhere more and more every month, and we just need to...
Glenn would like to.
Yeah, through the chair. Councillor, I was just driving along Leslie Drive on the weekend near the Noosa Springs roundabout, and there was 17 small pointer signs along the street. Not only is it visual clutter, but it was also along the grassed area where people walk as well.
Did you say Leslie Drive, was it, Ben?
Yes, yeah. Leslie Drive, and yeah, there was one after another. The other one was on Paul Street. Every weekend there's 8 to 10 there, and they're right on the verge. They're on the median strip, and I think it's visual clutter. And I think the other issue is that most people have a GPS these days, so they don't actually need that type of wayfinding sign.
Tony, then.
Yeah, on the same issue, Glenn, I've received a request from a major real estate agent in Noosa to have these signs banned across the Shire, which is unusual coming from a real estate agent, but I understand there's more than just one real estate agent has made that recommendation to staff. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
We've received 6 similar emails from individual real estate agents.
So 6 real estate agents have requested that there be no directional signage for
Correct.
open houses, etc. That's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, I just have a question relating to what I asked before about normal shop fronts and streets. Just so that everyone understands, including our audience, how does that work when you said it's a maximum of 10 square meters of sign? per 0.75 linear meter. Can you just explain that a bit?
So it's related to the width of the tenancy. So measured along that tenancy boundary where the tenant, the business occupies. So for instance, a tenancy with 5 linear metres of width would only be able to achieve 0.75 square metres times the 5 metre width in total sign face area. So the sliding scale is about recognising the scale of the building in that it's relative to the size. So it would only be large buildings and with the width of 13.5 metres wide would a 10 square metre total sign face area be achieved.
Yeah, so it's got to be at least 13.5 to get 10 square metres or larger. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So just to clarify there, if it's a 10 metre frontage, they'll be allowed 7.5 square metres
Correct.
of signage.
Yep.
In total.
Yep.
With no sign larger than 4 square metres.
Yep.
Correct.
And just to clarify that, some have painted or whatever you call window signs, tinted in some way onto the window. Does that count as one of those signs by the 10 square metres?
Yes, so a maximum window sign allowance is 4 square metres with no greater than 50% of the glazing of the window covered.
And that'll count into the
Total sign face area, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ready to go?
Is
Right.
that the complete
I'm happy to move it.
move? Councillor Stockwell.
I'll second it.
Seconded Councillor Glasgow.
So, councillors, just to clarify, essentially the only change in this is that it includes the word for each. Previously, the clause read as if it was the total. So we've had it redrafted to include that it relates to each shopping centre frontage.
So it also specifically refers to the building of the shopping centre, so that it doesn't, for example, with the village shopping centre, they have a frontage to Mary Street, but there's no building frontage to there, so that frontage is not counted.
It's just a driveway.
Yes,
Yeah.
so it has to have a building that fronts that particular street or car park area.
And you're
Can I just,
distinguishing between-
that doesn't make sense to me, sorry, can we
Yes,
just
go.
pursue that? Sorry, Anita, I mean, it is a building, it's just the side of a building or the back of a building. I mean, building frontage, it's the word frontage that is the critical term here, is it? Because it doesn't say that. Street front boundaries.
With the example of the village, it has a street frontage and it has a car park frontage. So the allowance there would be 10 square metres for each of those frontages. But Mary Street is not regarded as a frontage because there's no building that fronts it.
But the word front in the wording relates to the word street, not the word building. So I'm just going to take up that very issue of village shopping centre has a street frontage on Mary Street, has a street front boundary. Therefore, what you're suggesting is not captured in the wording, I don't think.
So if you go to BA, it says if the building comprising a shopping centre has one or more street front boundaries, 10 square metres for each shopping centre building with a street front boundary.
And the building has, it's not suggesting that it's the front of the building, it's suggesting that any part of the building on a street front.
Correct.
So therefore the back of the building is part of the building that has a street front boundary.
That's correct, that's the intent.
Except in the village, you've got a row of, you've got the Chinese restaurant and the other buildings have lots between the building and the street.
Yeah, I'm talking about, I'm sorry,
different-
not Mary Street, I'm talking about, sorry,
Gibson. Yeah.
Gibson Road, I beg your
Yeah.
pardon, I've thrown you a curveball there. The Gibson Road boundary would be captured in this then?
Correct.
Okay.
But just to clarify, in that case, because we discovered the other day, there's a difference between Noosa council's mapping and Google mapping in terms of the name of the streets. And on Google, the part that's the back of the back entrance is actually called Saltwater, whereas on the Noosa mapping it's called Gibson. And then there's also Gibson that's running up to the roundabout. So there are 2 bits of Gibson or 2 bits of Saltwater, which is not clear which, because the building is square and it has 4 sides, and it's not totally clear now which is called a street frontage and which is not. I'm not sure the wording's perfect.
In that instance, I believe from a planning perspective, we regarded that as one frontage. Sorry, I might just ask Lisa, who did the approval for that. Is that correct, Lisa? That was regarded as one frontage, that Gibson Road / if it's called partly Saltwater. Yeah, it is actually Gibson Road. Yeah.
They have a pylon signs in place with this.
So, in addition to that allowance, 1 pylon sign per street front as well.
That means 1, in this instance, for the example we're using, 1 for Gibson Road and 1 for the car park.
1 for Mary Street, yeah.
1 for Mary Street.
Yeah.
And you're distinguishing between signage allowable for the buildings itself, shopping centre building, and also there's signs for each individual tenancies.
Correct.
If they're facing the street or the car.
Correct. Yeah. So there's the, I guess you call it the premises allowance of the 10 square metres each frontage, plus each individual tenancy has an allowance of similar to any other tenancy in a street scape, which is the 4 square metres individual and up to 10 square metres on that sliding scale.
Yeah.
My suggestion would be that you've got the motion moved, now you get to move it to speak to it, and if there's any amendments that would be logical to come after that.
Yeah, there's a few amendments. Mooted. So
I shall speak. Yeah, and we've started interesting delving down into the detail where I thought it was important for this to try and identify why we're going back to a bylaw from the planning scheme. And this all started in 1983. And to me, it's one of the quintessential policies of this council that has made a significant difference to our economy. In 1983, Bryce Design, one of the leading designers in Queensland at the time, did a study of the tourist signage within Noosa Shire, and he said the dilemma for Noosa Shire Council and the community as a whole is how to preserve the uniqueness of the natural environment around Noosa alongside the many administrative and commercial interests. This will be achieved only through the cooperation of all who live and work in the area. However, it is the responsibility of the council to take the lead in preparing guidelines for a coordinated approach and where necessary to enforce standards. Still the main reason we're doing it today. He went further. He suggested that other cities have declared themselves nuclear free. We suggest that Noosa Shire adopt the principle of being free of visual pollution, addressing policies on advertising, streetscape furniture, building colours and plastic pennants would be an aid to observation of the tourist signs. And obviously, we have now got the Noosa Design Guidelines, and we've, it took till 1988 to get the first bylaw in relation to commercial signage, and plastic pennants were then the thing that used to litter the streetscapes and car yards. And we've got a new form of those in terms of the teardrop signs. What I consider some of the new cane toads of the advertising industry proliferating throughout the Shire. And I think it's really important that we remember the standards that were set in the 80s that led to what is Noosa today. And when I asked one of the 2 architects that was on that council some time ago about what he thought was important, he said the original intention was that people driving around would feel like they were in a national park where they had just allowed to live in. And they had the council signage had green for the rainforest and beige for sound. So we were just custodians.
Sand, not sound.
Sand, not sound, sorry, thank you, ma'am. So we were just custodians of a well-integrated environment where the natural environment predominated over the built. I think that's important. And I think I'll finish on the one last thing is, it is only a bylaw, and bylaws sometimes you think is just about how we enforce requirements. But what we're actually doing here is we're setting up a framework which helps embed the sense of place that our residents and ratepayers have in this place. And a sense of place is really important in how people living here think about the world they live in and how they want to work to achieve a common goal with council. And to me, I'm just going to finish on what a sense of place does. It's the particular experience of a person in a particular setting, feeling stimulated, excited, joyous, expansive, and so forth. It's the spirit of place, the combination of characteristics that gives some location a special feel or personality. Settings, a person's immediate surrounding, including both the physical and social environments. And to me, this bylaw gives us back the right to more forcibly control the way that signage helps to achieve our sense of place. Through both the dual mechanisms of both amalgamation, where I suppose the principles and policies weren't as strongly adhered to, and the fact that we went into a planning scheme environment where it was impossible to prohibit certain things. We have seen over the last decade a gradual diminution of some of those high quality, high standard approach to signage in the Shire, and this is the framework which will help us bring it back.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wellington.
I'm going to speak in favour of the motion. I agree with Councillor Stockwell's history, and the signage regulations were brought in under the Playford Council in the 1980s. One of the key attributes that sets Noosa apart is in fact our approach to public signage. I just want to remind councillors that it's easier to relax conditions following a public consultation process than it is to tighten them. Once we've received the submissions on proposals, inevitably it becomes almost impossible to make something like signage laws more restrictive. You can only respond really to submissions by making them less restrictive than what is being presented for consideration. So if there are individual issues where there isn't clear consensus, my suggestion is I urge councillors to go with the more restrictive option, because we can always wind it back later when the consultation's over. The staff have based their recommendations on this significant history that Brian's talking about of signage control measures in Noosa. And as I say, these historic restrictions are absolutely integral to the look and feel of Noosa and its attractiveness to both visitors and locals. So I want to support that history and the efforts that have gone on for the last few decades in Noosa, and therefore I support the motion.
Ingrid.
I would like to ask some questions, and the first one is back to what we've just done to fix a problem that appeared in the local law as it was written. I'm not clear at all what the difference is between 1 and 2 there. Can you explain that?
So if you look at B itself, it talks about whichever is the lesser of.
Yeah.
So this is about the sliding scale issue. So point 1 talks about the allowance of being up to 10 square metres per frontage, being the car park frontage or the street front frontage, public street frontage. And then the second point is, so the comparison is, the second point, a combination of those signage on a sliding scale. So the maximum is 10 square metres. However, if that frontage is, as we discussed previously, less than 13.5 metres wide, they may not achieve 10 square metres. So you have to go back to B to say which is the lesser of those two combinations, and that's what you get.
But looking at 2, it doesn't refer to each street front. It's back to sounding like it's only a one-off. I mean, it's not clear in 2 that we're talking about each street front, is it? It doesn't say each. No, it's talking about each shopping centre building.
With a street
That's a
front.
building, not a frontage.
With a street front boundary.
Well,
So
a building has street front boundaries, but it's talking about each building, not each boundary. And that is confusing, because I believe what you intend is that each frontage is allowed 10 square metres, up to 10 square metres, depending on the sliding scale. But at the moment it's saying each building is allowed up to 10 square metres. That's how it's written.
Each shopping centre building with a street front boundary.
Well, but each
Yeah.
shopping centre building,
It's
some don't have a street front boundary, so
No.
Noosaville doesn't. But that, let's say Noosa Village, which is the one that has street front boundaries, has 2 street front boundaries, but it doesn't say each boundary, it just says the building, so you could only have one
Could I
10 square meters.
could I suggest an amendment? I'd be happy to, because I think there is some potential lack of clarity. Each shopping centre building with a facade with a direct street frontage. So I think what Councillor Jackson's talking about is there's only one building per, if it's got 2 street frontages, you only got one building. But what we're actually trying to do is if the building has a facade, it's a big building and has a facade to 2 street frontages, then it gets 1 per street frontage. So it's the face of the building, not the building itself.
That would work.
So what would that entail in terms of?
Each shopping centre building with a facade.
Yeah.
Oh, each shopping centre building facade with a direct street frontage.
Don't go yet, Kat.
Yeah, so
which
each
section?
shopping
So
centre
which section,
building,
right? Is it
2A and B, 2A and B,
That's getting better.
facade.
Yeah.
And I would suggest
Same with
with the word with a direct street frontage. And you'd repeat that in the B.
Frontage instead of boundary.
Oh, frontage is better than boundary, isn't it?
So
Yep.
But then you got one on more at the top.
you've got to change A.
You've got to change that too, I can't. It doesn't.
No, you wouldn't have to go up top.
Well,
Well, they're okay.
no, you.
Is that okay or not?
You would need to change 1 A and B as well, because so
Yeah.
that you're comparing apples with
Yeah.
apples.
Each building comprising a shopping centre has 1 or more off-street parking areas. Yeah, no. Yeah.
And then you need to
And
have the same
1A,
1A and
B.
B.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Need direct
Direct.
too.
And then after any other potential amendments, we can just.
And B, Kath.
And B as well.
Yeah.
B be the same as
Facade.
2B, yeah.
Facade.
Shopping centre building facade.
Yeah.
You can just check and do it in a second.
Okay. Is that complete shopping, and I'm looking at 1B, shopping centre building facade with an off-street parking area? Yep. Is the mover and seconder
I'm happy.
of the original motion happy with that? Jess? Right. Yeah. Ingrid?
Yes, that's better. Now I'm clear. Thank you.
Right?
I still have more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I have a question about the Noosaville and Cooroy industrial areas. Can you just explain how it's proposed that that's a bit different than normal shops on the street?
In terms of the proposed change put forward, we're proposing to increase the individual sign face area for the Noosaville and Cooroy industrial zone, excluding Eumundi Road and Walter Hay Drive as gateways to Noosa. So the difference there is that it's recognising the industrial nature and use of the area, and also the larger size of buildings. So again, the proposal is for a maximum individual sign face area of 6 square metres, but also on a sliding scale. So if you've got a smaller building, you may not be able to achieve a sign greater than 4 square metres up to the 6. So again, it's measured about that tenancy width. So I guess the difference is it's in terms of other areas across Noosa. It's the land use and the built form are reflective of industrial uses, not within a main street format. And so we saw that there was a case for some difference in individual sign face area compared to, say, a main street environment of Noosa Junction.
Okay, thank you. So the difference between that and now is that at the moment they'd be allowed 4 square metre signs.
Correct.
here they would be allowed 6 square meter signs, but it would only be up to a maximum of 10 square meters,
Yes,
which means that you could have one 6 square meter sign and one 4 square meter sign. That's it.
correct.
And this includes window signs.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So just as an example that I think it was last month or the month before, we had a application before us for signage at a property in Noosaville industrial area, which had both a window sign and a larger sign, which had not complied with the current rules. Does one of you remember the size of those signs that were there? They're there already.
Pat, do you remember the size sign of the last month's industrial estate sign?
I thought it was around 6 square metres.
I thought it was larger.
I thought it was 8. Here we go. I got it here.
Oh, Brian's found it.
I'll get it.
It's 8.
I think it was 8 or 9.
I think it was nearly 9.
Yeah.
Is that the red one where they
Yep.
They're
have the
red.
approval
Yeah.
under the condition they built the
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It just take a while.
Oh.
I just have to get the agenda up.
So that one was 8, and they took up all the window space. Didn't they?
Rainy Street.
Yeah, that was 8. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll wait.
Yeah.
No,
You keep going and I'll
find
find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So at the moment, the proposal, rather than 4 square meters, is they can have a sign of 6 square meters.
Correct.
But they couldn't have 2 signs of 6 square meters because it's not adding up to.
It would
to
exceed
that.
the maximum total
So
of 10.
I'm going to propose an amendment, because I think if we're going to allow 6, which seems reasonable on large buildings.
Mr Chair, she's talking to the
Oh,
motion
I'm speaking
already
to the
before
motion. Okay,
moving
well,
it.
I'll propose the amendment and then I'll speak to the amendment. And Catherine, you've got that information. It's allow a maximum of total sign face area per tenancy of 12 square meters in the Noosaville and Cooroy industrial area.
That'll be the first one of those.
It's not a new item, it's actually, it's only the one of.
Only the
what's this?
first one, sir. The one that's B under your note there.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we're using one at a time.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do this one at a time, thank you.
Just move that down.
All right, so this is not a new item, this is
No,
actually
I'm just
an
changing, sorry,
amendment.
it's just wording that we have.
Yeah, okay.
So.
So that,
Can you just say what you want to?
okay, well that, I'm not actually, this is not how you read, this is not actually the actual local law wording that I'm changing, I'm just adding the information.
It's under the same, but we're moving it as an amendment, to say that.
While we're looking at that wording, it was 8.792 square metres.
Oh, thank you, thank you very much.
2 is very important.
So that's
Made all the difference.
Yeah, so that was.
There's nothing to do with that stuff at the top, because that's shopping centres, I'm talking about industrial.
So we're adding a new
It'd be
item
D.
A.
This has nothing to do with shopping centres.
We might.
It's not a new, I'm sorry, it's not a new item, it's an amendment to the local law.
So it would need to.
But in terms of the motion, it's
Yes,
adding
it's
a new item.
A in our motion, so.
Oh, it's a new item, sorry, yes.
We're gonna have to change this.
So
to
we're
say,
adding a D. Yeah,
well,
is the easy one.
It needs to relate to section A, so
Yes.
it's
A2.
A2.
Yeah, subject to.
Well, no, it's not related to shopping centres.
No, but it'll
No.
be another.
I'm sorry, this is
I think
not,
we're
nothing
going
to
to
do with
make
shopping
this
centres.
Yeah.
A.
So I'm
this
not
whole-
gonna add it to A. A is about shopping centres, it is a new
Make
item.
a suggestion about how we manage
It's a
it.
new
So
item.
Kath, bring it back up.
Yeah, I'm just going to.
Just bring it up. So my suggestion would be that go up to the top where we had the
This
original.
is going to be the new one, right? This
Okay,
is
go up to the top please. So where we've got in A2 of the current wording, We're saying that we're making the local law subject to the following change to Schedule 10B. I think what we should do there is say, subject to the following changes.
Yeah.
The first one's about 10B, and then we'll make other changes as we go
Okay,
through.
That's what I'm about to do down.
Yep.
Right. There's no subject to changes, but I didn't reword the local law. I'm simply, I think what Anita
And what
helped
we'll
me do
do-
is just point to what would be
Yeah.
changed.
And then I think at the very end, as we go through these amendments, if they're successful as we go through it, at the very end, we'd then authorise the CO to make consequential changes to the local law.
Yeah.
Got that.
So this will be
So that's
sort of A,
yep, Schedule 10, yep, and
and
then,
then we'll move over.
and
then
B,
B.
yes, so that's the amendment, is to add a new B to that provision, to allow
Allow a maximum total sign face
Yep.
for per tenancy of 12 square, where is it, down the bottom, 12 square meters in the Noosaville and Cooroy industrial zones, excluding Eumundi, Noosa Road and Walter Hay Drive. So the only difference that I'm proposing is to make in the industrial zone and not on the main road, which is publicly visible, but in the industrial zone, given that we're suggesting that
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Oh, you seconded, I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah, are you happy with the wording there?
The wording is the wording.
Can we get the wording right before anyone
Allow a
speaks
maximum
to it?
total sign face per tenancy of 12 square meters in the municipal.
Why are we including, Mr. CEO, all of that guff,
Because
when
I
all we
have-
really need is
all you need to do.
I have to change this to
item
B,
2 be
and then
amended
add
and
B.
item added? Yeah.
Because I have to change the item 2 to say, originally we
So
said
we
it.
didn't.
From change
we
to
had it-
changes.
Yes. So I have to
You could
make-
put changes in the original, no one will care, and that gets rid of all that guff.
Well, no, we need
It's
the
an
amendment
amendment.
though.
I know, the amendment B. So you add item B. Normally in an amendment you don't,
Changing
you know,
the part that you're changing, you're not putting all
you
the
don't put the whole original motion in an
No,
amendment.
but I'm changing this from subject to following changes. This was just saying before, it was just saying.
Oh, we have
subject
to
the following
change
changes,
that.
it'll be- so I have
10,
to
5,
make
8.
that A.
Do it once and then we won't do it again.
Yes, I have to make that A and then B.
Mumsy. Okay.
Well, otherwise there won't be a B.
That's the
It'll
trouble,
just be-
yeah.
There.
All right.
That's fine.
Just
Yeah.
Okay, so we're really only changing, oh gosh. Okay, doesn't matter.
What's
So
up
the
there?
thing that's different here is that I'm suggesting, I need
Right, we need a second.
seconder.
I'll second it.
You can't.
You can't,
Jess, you
Jess.
seconded the original motion.
Oh, you
so-
can second it.
And seconders of amendments can move subsequent amendments, can't they, Mr. CEO?
Yes.
Yes, correct. It's only the original
Yeah, I'll
mover and seconder who can't move it.
I'll second it.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I shall.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Councillor. So what I'm suggesting here is that as we are recommending that industrial zone buildings, which are generally quite large, are allowed to have a 6 square meter sign. And as an example, we had one a couple of months ago which had already installed a sign and a window sign, and the sign was
972.
8.72. It was, so it was bigger than what is being recommended. It was 2 meters, square meters bigger than what is being recommended. But it's being recommended that we allow up a 6 square meter sign. And at the moment, that would be a sign that's 6 square meters, and then any additional sign, like a window sign, could have to be less because they'd only be allowed up to 10 square meters depending on the width of the building. And I'm recommending, and obviously it depends on the width of the building, that with a large building, that it would be reasonable to allow 2 6 square meter signs, whether they're window signs or wall signs. So seeing that we're moving towards a 6 square meter sign in the industrial area, why not make it 2 of them? And that's why I'm suggesting up to 10 square meters, and clearly that's up to 12 square meters because of the, so that's what I'm suggesting, and the reason is that I can't see a logic in not allowing that, and I think in terms of visual amenity, it is an industrial zone, the buildings are industrial buildings. I don't see that in any way is against Noosa design principles because of the environment. And I also think that in many cases these signs have to be visible from the road, and I think the building we happened to look at 2 months ago was actually quite set back from the road, and I mean the whole idea is the drivers can see them and catch them as they're driving. It's not a place where people are walking around and eyeballing things close. So yeah, so I think that would be a reasonable thing to offer instead of limiting it to just 1 6 square meter site.
Just a question to staff. I can see the intent, but in the local law, there doesn't mention the sliding scale here. So in the local law, is that captured, or how would I put it? The size of the building, to say there'd be 2 or 3 tenants to all go that size, under that amendment there, I'm just not seeing that. So to capture that, so is that within the local law? Yeah, I know it's an awkward question.
Are you asking does the sliding scale still apply?
Yeah, I guess, because that's obvious question, I guess, for the size of the building.
Yeah. So yes, the recommendation was with regard to where it says 10 square metres to change it to 12, and then the rest of the provision talks about the sliding scale. If I captured that correctly.
That is what I thought, because Anita didn't give me new wording for the local law. She simply gave me words that wouldn't show what's changed. So because it says maximum total sign face, that word maximum implies the intent that is in a sliding scale as per the existing proposed local law. So yes.
Okay. Captured.
Captured. Yeah.
So can I just ask questions for clarity? So this amendment is suggesting that we increase the total maximum of 12 square metres. Can you just, for the sake of clarity, Anita, explain what the recommendation is currently in the local laws with regard to tenancies in Noosaville and Cooroy industrial zones in terms of numbers of signs they can have in the maximum signage area? What is being recommended right now?
So in terms of the total maximum sign face area, no change is proposed. So it is to maintain the current 10 square metres. In terms of individual sign size, the proposal is to allow for an increase from 4 square metres, which is the current provision, up to 6 square metres. In terms of the number of signs on the building, we don't have any maximum number of signs, just the total area that they've got to not exceed.
And in terms of, another question if I may, Mr Chair, in terms of the current planning scheme stroke local laws provisions, what is allowed in Noosaville and Cooroy industrial areas at this point in time?
So currently they're allowed up to a maximum of 10 square metres of total sign face area, and for individual signs 4 square metres.
Thank you.
Sorry, on the sliding scale for the 10 square metres.
Tony?
Yeah, look, I've got concerns here because what was being referenced earlier is an issue that came to this council where a business had put in a larger than prescribed sign, and the reason that we didn't support the business in that case was because in fact they had breached their own conditions for the development approval. So in fact, it was a very different scenario. This was a scenario last time where we had a developer who had built renovated or whatever their industrial premises, and then gone ahead and put in a sign that was over and above the size that was allowed under the approved development conditions, without them having challenged the development conditions. Therefore, I don't see it as a useful kind of yardstick by which to judge what size signs should be, because it was clearly a willful act of breaching the conditions of the development approval. I have concerns that what's being proposed here to some extent undermines the work that our excellent signage control office has been engaged in for the last couple of years. Remembering that the audit of businesses found that over 80% in fact were compliant, and I have to say I've received almost zero blowback as a result of Jamie's efforts dealing with businesses in the Shire to get them to conform to the current requirements with regard to signage. If this was a major issue, we would be getting a lot more feedback, and I'm just not getting it. In fact, I think I've had maybe 1 or possibly 2 businesses in the last 3 years contact me about signage issues. So if there isn't a problem, what are we trying to fix? What's being proposed is over and above what's being recommended by staff, and really businesses elsewhere in the Shire are going to look at these industrial estates and say, if they can do it, why can't I? And it just creates confusion, and it requires council to be continually answering to the question why it is that there are such different signage regulations for different areas. The more consistency we can get here, the better. It's simpler, it's a more level playing field, and as I say, I'm just not receiving lobbying to increase the signage in the industrial estates. It's just not happening.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the Mayor's analogy is quite correct there with regards to that particular issue, developer non-compliant. I guess in a way, if I think back, I think I started a lot of this. I did suggest at meetings of council that we should look at the industrial site as a different site, because it is zoned industry, and thus the buildings up there tend to be constructed in a different way, and also very large buildings, obviously. So staff have had a look at that and done a good job, I'd say. I'm pretty agnostic with regards to this particular amendment. Either way, I don't think it'll do a lot of damage, but I won't support it. I'll go with the staff. There has been an increase, they've had a look at it, and there is opportunity for bigger signs now up in the industrial estate. So I think we've achieved the objective I was sort of thinking of going forward. So, you know, it's like when we start on this journey, 4 square metres. Is that the correct size? Is it 5? Is it 3? Pick a figure. You know, who makes the judgments? It's in the eye of the beholders, I guess, and what people think. So arbitrary picking for.
There we know. I've got a bit of a concern here. My motion is not about size.
It's 12 square
You're
metres.
talking about the maximum. You're talking about increasing.
Councillor Pardon is talking about the size of the sign.
You're talking about increasing the maximum to 12 square metres.
But Councillor Pardon is speaking about the size.
My ruling, Councillor, is that this is all very relevant and pertinent. Councillor Pardon should be allowed to continue his discussion.
Yeah, the motion talks about 12 square metres, an increase from 10 to 12 square metres, the amendment, sorry. So I was just talking about analogy. Is 12 square metres correct? Are you correct there? Is 10 what the staff proposing? It's a bit of, you know, a bit of this and a bit of that. Who's right, who's wrong? As I said, it's the way you see the big picture or the little picture, I guess, or the little sign or the big sign. So, but I just, I think we've got it right. Staff have got it pretty right. So I'm happy with that.
Thank you, Councillor Pardon.
I wasn't going to speak.
Okay. I'll speak.
You will.
Commercial and competitive pressure has for decades always demanded bigger and more commercial signage, and Noosa Shire Council and its community representatives have successfully held the line against such pressures for decades, and why should we give in now and allow bigger and more signage? Minimising and resisting the pressure to increase commercial signage is undoubtedly one of the principles that has shaped Noosa's character and will continue to set Noosa apart into the future. I go back to basic principles. How do Noosa's design principles, which we all endorse, apply to this decision? As indicated by this report, the planning scheme up to this point has sought to embody and enact those principles. And the whole thrust of the planning scheme has been to minimise and reduce signage wherever possible. There's been no call to increase the total amount of signage in the industrial estate to 12 square metres. This is a document, we're proposing to put a document out for public consultation. I'll be very interested to see if anyone requests 12 square metres, that there'd be 120, that the total amount of signage allowed in the industrial estate be allowed to be 120% of what it is currently. As indicated in this report and the enormous amount of work staff have done over the years to uphold these standards, it's clear they've seen reducing and minimising commercial signage as a clear direction from policymakers and the community, and they've worked to make that a reality, and that's embodied in their recommendation. This report, the proposed local law, is intended to make it easier to hold the line against a relentless push for bigger and more advertising signage now and into the future. And why now would we be allowing signs to be bigger at a time when their need as a wayfinding measure has been largely replaced by websites, Google Maps and online searches? Signs are still required on site, but I've never heard any compelling argument that they need to be bigger for people to find a business. The audit currently underway shows 82% of businesses are already complying with the current standards that seek to also create a level playing field for businesses. Why would we change course now when there's absolutely no need to make commercial signs bigger? And what are signs for? They're to help people locate businesses. How more often do they do it now? Online searches first. How big does a sign have to be? If after driving to an address you can't see 10 square metres of signage on a business, then you can argue that if it's 12 square metres, you're not going to see that either. If you allow 12 square metres, over time, almost everyone will notice the change in Noosa if commercial signs are allowed to grow to 120% of their current size. And for what reason? No good reason, as far as I can see. What will it do to Noosa over time? I can't support any proposal that undermines one of the key points of differences for Noosa, and over time we see Noosa's urban landscape resemble that of every other developed coastal community and city. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with our beloved Mayor. It's a very slippery slope to be going down. This is no precedent here. I have proudly say I have zero blowback on people going on about this new policy. I repeat, zero. Only people emailing me and companies emailing me saying, yes, I agree with certain aspects of the signs in terms of the real estate signs. It's a really slippery slope to be going down to start with going from 10 to 12. I'll state again that our motto says different by nature, and that's right. I've recently just spent some time on the Gold Coast. I've recently spent some time in Byron Bay. I've recently just been to Brisbane, and we are engulfed with neon and lights and signs and coffee and booze and pokies and all of that stuff.
All the places.
Coming back to my beloved Noosa, where I cut my teeth in these streets, is heaven. So I will never support anything more than what we've already got. It's a great situation. It's a great team that we've got to my front and my direct right. So I'm very happy with the current situation, so I won't be supporting it.
Sweet. Would you like to comment?
Certainly, with a right of reply. First of all, I would like to say that I am the first to vote against someone who does not comply with an original approval with a condition of signage size. And I certainly supported all other councillors in voting against the application that the size be accepted when in fact it was conditioned to be smaller and did not comply. The only reason I brought up that other sign that we saw 2 months ago is just to highlight that I'm not recommending a sign of that size, which I keep forgetting what size it was.
8.792 square metres.
Almost 90 square metres. So that is not what I'm recommending, and I'm certainly not recommending ticking off, allowing people to not comply to signage regulations. What I am recommending is simply that, given that our own staff, who have done a good job here, have recommended that in this industrial area where there are big buildings, doing warehouse type stuff and all that, manufacturing, it's logical to allow them to have bigger signage instead of just 4 square meters, allowing them to have a 6 square meter sign. I'm taking that little teeny step further and saying, well, if we're allowing them a 6 square meter sign, why not give them that extra couple of meters so they could have, instead of just having a 6 square meter sign and then another sign that's only 4 square meters, and they probably have more than one face on their building, that they be allowed up to 12 square meters. In other words, it's mathematics. 6 plus 6 equals 12, whereas when we've increased it to 6 but don't allow 12, we're not really somehow being quite as logical. I'd like to also say that some of the statements that have been made by Councillor Glasgow and perhaps also by Councillor Wilkie are extreme exaggerations of my intent. I'm extremely committed to Noosa design principles. I certainly don't want us to look like Nicklin Way, and I'm certainly not looking to see increases of huge amounts of signage all over Noosa. I'm looking here specifically at the industrial area. You will note that my recommendation is to exclude Eumundi Noosa Road and Walter Hay Drive, which is the entrance to Noosa, and that's already in the local law, and I support that. So, this idea that, this is the slippery slope towards massive signs all over Noosa is absolutely ridiculous. I will be calling for a division on this vote, and I think all I'm doing is a reasonable recommendation. In no way am I suggesting larger signs in Noosa.
Thank you. Put the amendment. Those in favour?
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry, in favour.
You are really?
That's Councillor Jackson in favour. Those against? The amendment's lost. We go back to the original motion.
Before you go on, I assume we're going to get some other amendments, just so we don't run into that same issue about having to replicate that. Can I suggest that the original mover and seconder of the motion accept that we make that change at the top subject to the following changes, and we break those paragraphs out.
I'm certainly comfortable with that.
Thank you, Mr. Seaver.
Rather than having we have to amend the whole thing.
It's
Bring
clunky.
that into that provision, and then that would make it easier as more amendments come forward.
Fixes my problem, thanks.
Yep.
One of your problems. Oh.
If everyone's happy with that, we'll make that change.
You want me to move my amendment?
Yeah,
Mr.
Councillor
Chairman?
Parham has an amendment.
I'll just get
And
Just
I'll
wait a
just
moment.
wait till it.
Just wait for a moment.
Yeah, there's no
you
rush.
get the
Yep.
stop up. Yep. And then it'll be amendment number 2, which will be from Councillor Parham.
Councillor Parham. I'll second it.
Frank, can I suggest you read this out? Not very long, it would make sense for those who are watching at home.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Include, you want to start at item A, etc. That item A be amended with a new item B to be added to read as follows. Include a sandwich board - A-frame signs as temporary self-accessible advertising devices with the following criteria. 1, the advertising device may only be used when the business is open. And 2, a maximum of 1 advertising device per tenancy is permitted. And 3, the advertising device must be placed on the property to which it refers, or where this is not practicable, possible immediately adjacent to the property. And 4, the maximum size permitted is 900 millimetres by 600 millimetres, or 0.54 of a metre, of a square metre on each side of the advertising device.
Can I ask a question before we proceed? Anita, in terms of the current regulations regarding A-frames and such like, is this replicating what is currently prescribed under our local laws?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
I haven't got a second.
I'm second.
Oh, sorry. Well, sorry. Thanks for that. Yeah, councillors, as Councillor Stockwell pointed out in his opening remarks, that we should maintain the standard in Noosa. Well, absolutely we should. So there's nothing I proposed here that changes the standard. This is what's allowable now. And what's being proposed here is in the changes of the local law is that this be prohibited. On page 20, it says it has a list of starts on page 19 of the administrative and other subordinate local laws report. There's prohibited advertising devices on page 19, and on page 20 it says a sandwich board or A-frame. So it's under, in this consultation we're going out in this draft, it prohibits a sandwich board. So what, from my perspective, it isn't a status quo. We're taking sandwich boards away. Now in the discussions we hear about all the signage on side of roads and real estate agents and signage. All I'm proposing here is status quo. It gives opportunity to the little businesses in the towns and villages here to put, you might be able to find them, but how about their little specials? Coffee $3.50 a cup, the little cupcake for sale, etc. That's what they put out, their little specials out on the footpaths or wherever in front of their shops throughout the Shire, as they have done for many years. And the Mayor talked about blowbacks or complaints. I don't get any complaints about sandwich boards, etc. And if there's more than one now, they should be taken away under the local law. The law is they can only have one. So if this is a big deal, we should be fixing it up now. We don't have to wait because you can only, that's the law is the law. So we talk about standards. The size of it sets a standard, the size of the device. It can only happen when it's the shop's open. So there's already a list of standards up there, sizes, where you put it. So for me, as a tourist town, I don't think the little ads on sandwich boards for coffee, cake, etc. are a big deal. And in fact, business is flaming hard out there. It is really tough. And so we propose to go forward to put a charge on businesses, $52.50. That's with discount. So to me, just in a common sense approach, I'm now going to charge you for your signage, but you're not allowed to have these little sandwich boards anymore. But it just doesn't fit for me. Thank you.
Question to start. What are the principal advantages of having having requirements such as that for sandwich boards? What are the advantages, if any, of going from an enforcement perspective of moving from town planning provisions to a local law in terms of signage?
Generally, you mean, do you? Not
Generally,
specifically with
yeah,
regard to
because
A-frames.
this may be in or out.
So under a planning scheme, the provisions are performance-based, whereas under local law, they're prescriptive. So if it's prohibited, it's prohibited. There can be no application made. There's no appeal rights where a sign is prohibited. So I guess the advantage is that it's much more definitive.
More easily enforced.
Yes.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, look, this is a tricky one because Councillor Pardon's absolutely correct that at the moment we do allow A-frames, one per tenancy. Unfortunately, they tend to proliferate somewhat, and they don't always, the users don't always stick to the regulations in terms of ensuring that they don't encumber people using footpaths and pathways, etc. But the reason staff are now recommending the prohibition of A-frames is obviously because they have a problem that they have to deal with. It's not we councillors, it's the poor staff who have to go around dealing with the errant A-frames and their owners. And the fact that they see a problem is obviously why they've come to us now with a suggested solution, which is to make A-frames prohibited devices. It's certainly true, and my personal observation, that they do frequently interfere with pathways, that they can look unsightly, particularly where they're clustered together. They're not always in good repair. They end up, particularly where there's a number of shops in a small space like an arcade, they do end up getting quite prolific, and we've seen that locally here in Tewantin. And as we've heard, there are also public liability issues in terms of these things when they, should they blow over or should people run into them on public footpaths, etc. There is a cost, obviously, also to Noosa Council to be continually policing them, and it seems that A-frames are one of the advertising devices that are a continual bugbear for Council, and even when we have regulations approving them, still require constant monitoring and a significant cost to ratepayer to ensure that businesses are sticking to the regulations. I revert back to what I said at the beginning to the substantial motion, and that is it's always easier to relax prescriptions that restrict signage following the consultation process than it is to further restrict them. So although I'm not, I don't have extremely strong opinions about this, I think we should err on the side of the staff recommendation and test the water to see what our residents and local businesses have to say about the issue. So I'm not going to vote for the amendment. I think it would be far better if we go out to consultation with a prohibition on A-frames and see whether or not that is acceptable to the majority of people.
Brian.
Just have a question that was prompted by items 3 there and Councillor Pardon's commentary. The way the bylaw, draft bylaw is currently proposed, would that prohibit a temporary catch of the day type sign in a premises? So by the fact that in here is talking about on the property or immediately adjacent to property, does that mean that effectively the bylaw would prohibit A-frames or the blackboard signs in your premises as well?
Correct.
Sorry, I just heard, can I understand the words blackboard signs? Is that an A-frame blackboard?
Well, if it was like a temporary sign inside the business would be prohibited if it was a sandwich board.
Oh.
And so, and then a subsequent question, the the real problem, as I understand it, is the A-frames on the footpath in public land and also cluttering around the opening to arcades. Is that the problem which we're seeking to address by prohibiting them? That they're getting cluttered, they're put out in the breach more often than in compliance and all that sort of stuff, but it's not necessarily the stuff inside shops or...
Well, I guess it depends on the premises itself. The homemaker is an example where those A-frames are actually within the property.
Oh yeah. So the bigger shopping centres.
And then I guess if you look at Gympie Terrace, some of those signs are in public land, but some of them might be in the lease area as well. So strictly speaking, within their tenancy. So I guess the intent is that whether it's on the property or on the public street, it is creating a visual clutter and adds to that increase in signage.
Yeah. Now my question is more, agree with that, is the ones within a building. But anyway, this amendment doesn't go there, so we can once again see if there's any great or suggestions coming out of the consultation period.
Another question for staff. If this amendment was to be passed and went out for public consultation and then was approved as part of the local law, given that it will be enforced under a local law, do you feel you would be better equipped to ensure that the number of sandwich boards will be more in line, in keeping with what is intended under the local law, that you'll be able to enforce the placement of the sandwich boards better, that the proliferation of sandwich boards, you mentioned some businesses have more than one, that the system will be more likely to work in a manner in which it was originally intended if it's managed under a local law?
So I might just answer that. Currently, this advertising device, which is a temporary one, is managed under a local law. Yeah.
What are we?
So all temporary signs, all temporary signs are managed under the local law. Permanent signs are managed under the planning scheme. Yeah, it's bringing them all under the one umbrella, which is the local law.
So Jamie, is it Phil Ampson's team who are always chasing up these sandwich boards?
No. We do it. Yeah. Yeah.
And you work for town planning and local laws?
Yep. No, town planning, but I've got the authority to work under local laws. Yeah.
So you're saying that staff currently have a range of issues, even though it's managed under a very prescriptive local law?
Yeah, still issues, correct. Yep.
Speakers for the motion.
Well, I was thinking also, my understanding is that the aim of the changes to the rules in this case, regardless of the fact whether it's coming out of the plan or whether it's already in the local law, is that one of the aims is to declutter, and that clutter actually is not in keeping with design principles, and whether it's something that we did in the past or not has not been the only criteria for the decisions about what's been put forward to us by staff about what should happen. I actually support the idea of decluttering. I do think that signage has its place, and obviously it's important to businesses, but I think there are ways to communicate how much a coffee costs without having a sandwich sign. So in this case, I won't support the motion because I'm actually supportive of reducing clutter and generally reducing signage, as long as it's a reasonable approach. So I'll ask for division, and I won't be supporting this motion.
Right.
Jeff?
Have a question?
Question.
Jamie, would you agree that when you have these conversations with businesses about this A-frame in particular, I won't name names, you and I have had quite a few discussions over this over the past years, that once you get sort of in with them and you reiterate the fact that, you know, about our sign policy, that they usually do come to the party and end up agreeing that it is a slippery slope to go down, to consistently be putting the A-frame out into a location where it can't be, and then they end up putting it back onto their boundary or pulling it in or whatever the actual. Would you agree that's a one-off conversation and things are done, or it's an ongoing process?
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. I have that conversation with everybody, and generally a lot of the time they'll stick with that for a month or two, possibly 3, then it just all starts going back out to where it used to be before. So just that constant follow-up.
All right.
Yeah.
Got another question. The businesses that are currently in arcades, they've been putting their sandwich boards out on the roadside, I understand, to direct traffic down the arcades.
Yep, that's what I found when I've been doing there.
And what are you proposing to, if the proposal is to remove the capacity to have sandwich boards, you're proposing another solution to that?
Yeah, so we're proposing an additional sign type, being a multi-tenanted arcade sign, which will allow for tenancies that are inside to advertise their name in a multi-tenanted framework up to 2 square metres. So that could be placed on the facade of the building, whereas currently they don't have any provision for that. It's really the tenancies who are outside who have that allowance. So that's an alternate that we're proposing, specifically to deal with the arcades.
Brian?
I think the intent of the motion is one that we always have to consider, is are we placing restrictions on small business that in some cases affects to a substantial will affect them to a point where their business is a little bit less viable, and there is no doubt there is places in the Shire where an A-frame board could be appropriately located and appropriately designed so it wouldn't create clutter. And unfortunately, the experience since the 98 Council is that these are the types of signs which are the most consistently put out in breach of what the requirements are, tend to lead to the clutter, tend to create a ad hoc appearance around our commercial centres that takes away from the intent of what we're trying to achieve by having a policy on signs. And in that way, it would be a shame that those businesses who could benefit, that have been abiding by the current rules, could be seen to be disadvantaged. But I think that when you look at it from the bigger picture perspective, is we're reviewing signage laws to go forward. Staff have identified the most common form of breach, the most common form of clutter are these temporary signs, not just A-frames but also the teardrop signs. That now is the time to say, no, this is the standard we set now. This is the new level playing field. As long as the same rules apply to all businesses, then they won't be disadvantaged.
Councillor Pardon makes some excellent points, advocating on behalf of the business owners who do become very attached to sandwich boards and A-frames. They do have the capacity to tell a bit more about the character of the business and their offerings. But then again, the points that Councillor Jackson made about decluttering the streets and the design principles, which are a big tenet of the design principles, is about reducing signage wherever possible. This is a document that's going out for consultation as a first point. I'll be very interested to hear what comes back. But long term, I would like to see Noosa streets cleaner and with less visual clutter. I'm not saying there are not going to be hard times ahead during this consultation process, but as a principle, I have to be consistent and support this move towards reducing signage, advertising signage. So, despite Councillor Pardon's excellent arguments, I'm inclined to not support this amendment. Any other councillors wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Pardon wish to close.
Yes. Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. The Mayor was in error when he said ratepayers have to pick up the bill. Business being charged for these signs, $52.50 with discount, collecting about $90,000 from memory. And the big problem I hear is, well, there's more than one sign, there's creep. Well, if you collect the 90,000, you can pay someone to go out there and sort it out. That's what it's about. You got a tax, and the collection pays for an officer to look at the whole situation within Noosa and actually regulate your policy. I mean, that's what's happening here. Let's be clear. And you know, no different to regulating barking dogs, etc., or dog attacks. We've had 30 dog attacks a month. So what are we doing? We're putting on more staff to actually regulate and assist out there. No different to what's here. So it's no impact on the ratepayers. It is small businesses who already pay a number of rates, their house rates, their business rates, and now another $52. And for that, we take away your little sandwich board. I'm glad someone called a division on this. I'm real happy. Thank you.
Okay.
That'll do me.
I'll put the amendment. Those in favour? Councillor Parton, Councillor Glasgow. Those against? Wellington, Jackson, Wilkie, Stockwell.
It's not full cost recovery.
Don't bring me.
Okay.
And I have some more questions to ask.
Yes, Ingrid.
Mr. Chair, it's this time relating to shopping centres. Anita, can you tell us, with the new proposed local law, which of our centres are actually defined as shopping centres?
The definition of shopping centre is the same definition that's in the new Noosa plan. So it talks about an integrated complex. And so having spoken at length with the strategic planners, that's an internal shopping centre where you've got an integration of facilities and network of plaza and pathways. So those internal shopping centres that are existing in Noosa are the Civic, the Village, the Fair, Noosa Fair, and the Noosa Junction Plaza.
Okay, and which of those existing shopping centres have already got development approval for their signage which exists?
So Noosa Civic have, as part of their approval, they're required to prepare a signage management plan, and that's what guides their signage, and the provisions. So that plan identifies sign zones where signage can go, and then the provisions of the former local law apply. So that's pre-Noosa plan. And with the Noosa Village, they recently came to council, had approval for a review of their signage, and one aspect of that is in appeal. In terms of Noosa Fair, I'd have to get back to you on Noosa Fair and Noosa Junction. In terms of what their approval says.
So, the old approvals too.
Yeah. Let me know. So the question I have related to that is then, will this local law, so there are only 4 shopping centres, and perhaps I should start with, do we expect under the new Noosa plan any more shopping centres?
No, we don't expect
We don't. So we've got 4 shopping centres. Do we, would this new local law apply to those shopping centres where they already have approvals?
No, it's not retrospective. So any approvals that are current continue to be current and are deemed approvals under the local law where they're compliant with their approval.
Yeah.
Can I just double check on your answer there in terms of this side of Cooroy? there's a potential for small-scale shopping centre, is there not?
Yes, there is. Sorry, apologies for that. There is a potential for a small-scale shopping centre, and it's likely that we would consider signage as part of that development. I should also clarify of the four that Anita talked about, there could be redevelopment of those. So they would be considered a shopping centre new development, and potentially they could relook at their signage as part of that.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yes. So I still want to ask. Can you just explain to us now? We've gone through this, trying to understand. So, what is it that you're proposing for new developments or people that come with new approvals for shopping centres? What signage can the shopping centre, we're not talking tenancies yet,
Okay.
but what signage can the shopping centre put up about the shopping centre?
Yep. So the proposal is that each building facade, as we've just changed it, that addresses the street or an internal car park arrangement can have up to 10 square metres of total sign face area. So that's on a sliding scale. So if they've got a short frontage, then they may not reach the 10 square metres. And each individual sign continues to be what is currently allowed, which is 4 square metres.
So the shopping centre, and in this case, the shopping centre might be called Noosa Civic or Noosa Village or Noosa Junction Plaza, is allowed 4 square metres to say the name of their shopping centre. That's what we're saying here.
They can use that allowance to have signage for the name of the building or a tenant or whatever they like. It's not restricted per se, as in what the signage can be about. So it's just the allowance of 10 square metres.
Okay, because I'm a bit puzzled because when I read the local law, it refers to shopping centres, and then separately it has another set of rules about tenancies within shopping centres. But it doesn't say that shopping centres imply that it could be used for tenancies or whoever or whatever they want.
Well, I guess it's silent on it. So,
it's silent.
yeah. But the other reference to tenancies is clear that it's specifically outward-facing tenancies.
That's right.
So any tenancy that faces the car park, an internal car park or a street, has that additional allowance of 10 square metres per tenancy on a sliding scale. So I guess there's nothing in the local law that says that the shopping centre allowance couldn't be for a tenant, like an anchor tenant, or a shopping centre name. It's just silent on it.
Okay, so
it doesn't regulate the content.
It doesn't regulate the content, although I have to say when I read the local law, it doesn't tell me it's not regulating the content. It refers to shopping centres and the signs, and then it refers to tenancies and the signs. So it looks like, it reads like it's about shopping centres. I mean, it's all very nice for you to tell me, you're telling me that there is a flexibility there, but the law isn't written that way. So I've got a concern about that.
It's, I mean, our current planning scheme and our current local law also doesn't say that it regulates the content. It's not our practice to regulate the content. We regulate the size, the type, the shape, but there's no requirement in either of those documents that we regulate the content. So that's been carried through. We haven't had a practice of regulating content of a business and how they utilise their signs. Like
so a shopping centre could put, just to clarify and to understand, so that means that at the moment your proposal is a maximum of 10 square metres per street front and car park area front, and street front has some definitions which seem to be a bit questionable, but anyway. So we've got street front, car park, and they can have up to 10 square metres with signs that are 4 square metres.
Correct.
So they could have 2 4 square metre signs and a 2 square metre sign.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what it says.
No. That could be used for tenancies that are internal to the shopping centre, or it could be used for the name of the shopping centre.
In practice, what generally happens is they have, as part of their leasing arrangements, some of their key or core tenancies tend to have that higher attraction value, so they tend to put those names out there.
Okay.
But that's a commercial arrangement as part of the tenancy and the lease details.
Okay. So that's left, I didn't understand that. I certainly thought when it said shopping centre in the local law, it meant it was a shopping centre sign because it refers to shopping centre sign. I'm not totally comfortable that it doesn't, but in that case that changes my proposal, because I was proposing to make an amendment to allow the shopping centre sign to be 6 square metres and an anchor tenant to be allowed 6 square metres. So I think, therefore have to combine what I was going to propose, because I was under the impression that the shopping centre sign didn't include the anchor tenant. But if it does, I would then therefore propose that the shopping centre anchor tenants could be allowed 6 square metre signs, whether they're inward facing or outward facing. So that changes the existing proposal, which is 4 square metres in 10 square metre maximum.
Correct.
And I would then have to recommend 6 square metres. I'll arbitrarily would go for 12 square metre maximum in that case, just to. So it has, oh, sorry, I have to look over here. So I originally put forward 2, but now it seems that the shopping centre sign incorporates the anchor tenant.
So you may only need the first one.
But the first one may not cover the whole thing. Increase the maximum shopping centre sign face area for individual centre to 6 square metres on each street. I would have to add to that the maximum of 12 square metres, up to 12 square metres, depending on the sliding scale. Shopping centres are big.
So, if I understand correctly, you'd get rid of the second part of what you're proposing, which is that.
Yes.
And then incorporate at the end, so delete that cap. And then at the end of street frontage, each street frontage in the second line there.
Yeah.
You put in that maximum that you're talking about.
Yeah, up to a total of 12 square metre.
Up to a total of
12 square metres.
But I think I would like to make clear, and I'm not comfortable that it's not clear, in the local law, that it increased the maximum shopping centres.
Just get the first part.
Okay. What's this?
Hang on. He's thinking about a toilet break, that's all. Or you're missing off the chair.
Mr. Mayor, could you chair for 5?
Yeah, sure.
2 minutes, please.
Hang on, we've got a tag.
Thank you.
Yeah, you'd have to note it.
We have to move.
Oh, we have to we move. Second. So, my concern here is twofold. One is that it doesn't, that there's some confusion because there's specific other local law statements about outward facing tenants, but this doesn't state that this might include the inward facing anchor tenant. So I would prefer to have that incorporated in some way, because I'm not happy that it's not clear. So it would need to say maximum shopping centre. Well, no, you should suggest.
So just explain that again. What you're trying to
My
increase the
concern
maximum.
is that the definition of shopping centre is not clear, because I'm being told that shopping centre might also include signage of the anchor tenant, but I don't see it there. I see shopping centre, which to me is the word Noosa Civic, Noosa Village. I would like to see the wording to also say, okay, so the maximum shopping centre sign face, including inward-facing anchor tenants or anchor tenants.
Yeah, for anchor
There is
tenants.
a definition in the local laws for shopping centres.
Yes.
Shopping centre means the use of premises for an integrated
just have to
shopping
say.
complex consisting mainly of shops.
Well, the integrated shopping complex is Noosaville. Thank you.
Signage or something.
Yeah.
Thanks. It says here what it is. What have we lost? Here, shopping centre means the use of premises for an integrated shopping complex consisting mainly of shops. So the name of the shopping centre is Noosaville.
That definition is about the use, not about the sign.
Right.
So that then refers back to if you're doing that use, being a shopping centre,
Okay.
this is our sign allowances.
All right, so perhaps I need an additional C that says that shopping centre sign faces can also, the shopping centre may include tenancy signs in their signs or something.
Yeah, maybe we need to change the definition to be clear about
The
that.
other way to do it is in this part, is what Ingrid's concerned about. At the end of the first line there, increase the maximum shopping centre sign face area for individual advertising signs, open brackets, including anchor tenant signage. Close brackets to 6 metres.
Yeah.
Does that cover your artwork, Ingrid?
I believe it would, yeah.
So at the end of after internal advertising devices, on the first line, individual advertising devices, open brackets, open brackets, including anchor tenant signage.
Is it just internal anchor tenants you're talking about, Ingrid?
No.
No, okay.
That would I think cover, and then we can test that through the amendment, but people are happy with that one.
While we're working on wording, would it be better to say increase the maximum sign face area for individual advertising devices in shopping centres?
Yeah. On shopping
centres?
Yeah.
So delete shopping centres from the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, then we have, that bracket thing doesn't work there. No, because there's another, this is confusing, because there's another statement in the local law that outward facing tenancies are allowed up to 10 square metres of signage with 4 square metre signs. And they're also on the shopping centre. So this is only specifically to that bit that's not external facing tenancies.
So maybe it's set of brackets is including internal anchor tenant signage.
Yeah, the confusion then becomes if you have an external.
Yeah, no, Ingrid's right. It actually does need to refer to shopping centre signage.
So that's a defined sign?
It's defined,
okay.
That's right.
I think it's to increase the maximum allowance for sign face area for individual advertising devices on shop, because it probably needs to refer back to the shopping centre provision. Sorry, I just...
Well, there's two things. There's a sign size and maximum allowance. There are two things. So it's increasing the sign size to 6 and increasing the maximum
And the total,
allowance to 12.
We should break it into a B and a C.
I think we should have two.
Break it into 2 parts.
Back to 2 parts.
Might be simpler.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, break it up.
Make it sign size 1 and allowance the other.
Yeah.
Good idea.
We were so well prepared for this item.
It's tricky, and you always just got to work through these one at a time. Just work out.
See that some sign everywhere. Some do this, don't do that. Can't do this.
We should have one meeting where we have to sing everything.
The sign says long head creepy.
Does that work?
It does, but I'm not sure why the word allowance is in B. That's probably not. anymore.
No, that's right. So we don't need to increase that. Yep.
Increase the shopping centre sign area for individual and container and shopping centre between internal and entertainment signage to 6 square metres on each street frontage. Yeah, and allow up to 12 square metres. Okay, that's, I think we're there, I'm sorry that wasn't, I didn't understand that definition of shopping centre signage that has been explained today, and that's why I wasn't ready with this one. So, that is my proposed motion.
So do we need it on each street frontage?
Yeah,
I'll second it.
Yeah, for each.
Do we need
Yes.
So I think we need a little bit more on
B, C, yeah.
We need
Something
that to
missing?
say on each street frontage.
Oh, yeah.
Street path.
Yeah,
On each street frontage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Street parking area frontage.
and off-street parking frontage.
Basically, as above the same end of the
End.
I think to be consistent with the previous change we made, it needs to say on shopping centre building facades.
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does 19% of that response to
You have your thing.
Yes, I think it has to, the lower one. Oh, it does say that, yeah, okay, that's fine. Yes, I'm ready with that now. Yeah.
All right, you have the floor.
Oh, I have the floor. Well, I guess what I'm going to suggesting this, it's a slight increase in sign size for the anchor tenant and the shopping centre itself. And the reason is that shopping centres are generally quite large buildings, and people are usually driving by in a car. They're not necessarily walking nearby. And I think it's quite reasonable to have signs that are readable. And in addition, I think it's quite reasonable to have the shopping centre sign and the anchor tenant have a bit of a priority or a higher level of visibility than the other tenancies that may exist front-facing, which are more like ordinary shops, and they happen to be in a shopping centre, which is how they're being treated with the 4 square metre sign. I think it is quite reasonable to treat shopping centres differently than normal shops in a street. I think they are large buildings, whether we like it or not, and they exist whether we like it or not. And I think that a slightly larger sign, 6 square metres is still quite a small sign for a large building. It's still managed, it's carefully managed. My understanding is that and again, I'm not suggesting this, but the approved signage that we just approved recently for Noosa Village is the Woolworths BWS sign is 10 square metres. So that's, for those of you who remember that sign and you think about Noosa Village, 10 square metres. So we're not even looking here at a 10 square metre sign. We're talking about 6 square metre signs up to, and up to 12 square metres, 2 of them, which might be the anchor tenant and the shopping centre itself. So yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at the business of being a shopping centre, the business of having an anchor tenant, remembering that the reason they're called an anchor tenant is that that is the draw card for why people go to that centre. The other shops go in there very happy because they can cluster around the anchor tenant and they know people are going there to whether it's food or whatever. They go in there for that anchor tenant and then the other shops benefit. But the anchor tenant is the big draw card. And I really think we need to be thinking horses for courses rather than treating a shopping centre in the same way that we treat a little shop on the street. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got a query about the wording still, I'm afraid. I'm wondering why the word in brackets internal needs to be there, because to me it suggests you're talking about signage inside the building.
Yeah, it's confusing.
If you just take out the word internal,
It's
it
okay.
might resolve that issue.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Councillor Stockwell.
The question, as it stands in the industrial estate, they are allowed 6 square metres?
Currently, 4.
No, I mean,
Oh, under
sorry,
the proposal?
as the draft bylaw stands, it's 6 industrial.
For individual, yeah.
And the failure of Councillor Jackson's previous amendment restricts that still to 10 square metres. So if we're trying to make it consistent with industrial estate, we would go with item B but not item C. Is that how it would be?
You're speaking to the motion?
No, I'm asking.
Yes,
That's
that would be correct.
I'll speak to the motion. I probably would support item B, but I don't support item C.
Thank you, Brian.
I'll speak to the motion.
Tony?
Look, people know what's in a shopping centre before they go there, particularly locally. It's pretty clear. The anchor tenant's usually a Woolworths or a Coles. And a shopping centre is a shopping centre. They have pylon signs outside which note all their tenants. I don't see the need to increase the overall signage area on the exterior. I opposed the increase in signage at the village shopping centre when it came before council, and I don't see the need to add more visual clutter just because it happens to be a shopping centre as opposed to any other business.
The councillors wish to speak to the motion. You wish to close?
Yes, I will. Yeah, I don't think this is the same as an industrial estate. I think this is, one that flashes by my mind a lot is Noosa's village, which of course has more than one side. Some of the others have not got more than one side and would need a management plan anyway to manage that. But I actually feel that there is nothing wrong with 6 square meters. It's not a huge sign. And the idea that everyone knows it's there, well, we actually have a very large number of visitors, and those visitors go shopping. That's part of what they do when they're on holidays and they need food to cook. So people are driving by and looking for that, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to have 6 square meter signs for the key wording in a shopping centre on a very large building. Yeah.
Okay, put the amendment. Those in favour.
I have a call division.
Call division. Those in favour of the amendment.
That's you.
That's
Councillor Jackson. Those against. It's Wellington, Stockwell, Pardon, Glasgow, and Wilkie. The amendment's lost. I'd like to have a turn.
Everyone else has.
Number 4. Yeah.
God, this is getting long. I'm sorry.
Gotta try it.
Gotta try it, that's right.
Yeah, you probably win.
I'll second.
You can't. Oh,
No, yes I can. I beg your pardon.
Sorry.
I kept my powder dry.
So who's got the original motion?
Brian.
Brian.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Right, Brian's out of the room. Happy for me to start any questions about the wording.
I'll ask a question of staff while we're waiting for Councillor Stockwell to come back. If this amendment were to get up, what impact would that have in terms of Jamie's current efforts to get compliance in places like the industrial area? Would it mean he would have to go back to a whole lot of premises?
No. Status quo. No, but it's status quo, so no.
Yeah. We haven't done a lot of the industrial area at the moment, so.
Depends on the conversation.
Yeah.
So the industrial area hasn't been undertaken yet, other than where we've had.
They only did say done some of Noosaville, so I assumed that some of it had been done
just
earlier.
only a little bit, yeah.
And some businesses have been done based on complaints. So there are some businesses in the industrial estate. But if you're referring to Councillor Wilkie's proposed amendment,
Correct.
then that is what the status quo
Yep.
is.
Currently is, yeah.
So Jamie's audit would be enforcing the status quo, current arrangements, which it is, current local law and planning scheme provisions, which is that provision.
But in the Noosa industrial area?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's still the same.
Same.
Yep.
Yep.
So that would be as is now.
Yeah.
Just you wouldn't need to go back and do anything.
No, I wouldn't, no.
No.
So, if this was moved and support carried, what would change in the proposed local law?
So the only change would be to the proposed 6 square metres, the proposed increase to individual sign face area to 6 square metres in the industrial area. That's the only change.
That's all that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's reducing.
Yeah, it's maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
All right, councillors, the proposed amendment is to retain the maximum sign face of 4 square metres for individual advertising devices, as is currently the case throughout Noosa Shire, regardless of zone or location. And I do that because the audit underway has indicated there's 82% compliance. I understand there's the proposed increase from 4 to 6 square metres in the recommendation is in response to staff noticing a very small number of businesses in the industrial estate which have non-compliant signs, and this would capture that. But given that 82% of businesses generally are complying and willing to comply, I don't see a compelling argument to increase the sign face area from 4 to 6 square metres. And bear in mind that this is what's proposed to go out for public consultation. I'd also be very surprised if there's a huge push back from the community to increase the individual sign face area from 4 to 6 square metres, and we can take that into account after the consultation period. But given the high level of compliance with the current arrangements, I see no good reason to increase the sign face area for individual signs. And again, to be consistent, it is inconsistent with the whole thrust of what we're trying to do, which is reduce and minimise signage. Tony?
Yeah, look, I like this because it supports the current and historic approach to signage in Noosa. I've heard a number of councillors here today, this morning, saying that they don't want to increase visual clutter. This ensures that we don't increase visual clutter. So I'm absolutely supportive of maintaining the status quo, which has served us well for a number of decades.
Frank?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm ambivalent about this. I ran this up the flagpole and happy to run it up the flagpole. It was just a common sense approach that I took with regards to the size of buildings in the industrial estate and treating that as a precinct on its own. So, whether we hold the status quo or not, I'll probably vote against this, seeing I run it up the flagpole originally, but I have no particular gripe either way with regards to that. And we talk about maintaining the status quo here, and we don't talk about it on sandwich boards. We ain't maintaining no status quo there.
Let it go for a minute.
Anyway, interesting. When it suits.
Brian?
I won't be supporting it. I think, as with the sandwich boards, you look at the thrust of what you've been trying to achieve and you identify at this point in time, are there areas where we need to review and change our settings. To me, this one, when you look at the bulk and scale of buildings in the industrial estate, a 6 metre maximum sign face area does not appear to be clutter, it does not appear to be oversized. If we had it everywhere, you would find that it would give appearance of visual bulk, because there'd be so many little tenancies trying to get to the maximum sign face area. We've still got the sliding scale. It doesn't change the sliding, that allows the extra 2 square metres to come into place. And I think we've got professional staff recommendation, which suggests to me that they too see the wisdom or the merits in considering this from a urban design perspective, that it won't contribute or diminish the overall objectives of our long-standing sign policies.
I'll speak. Well, I agree with Councillor Stockwell that I think it is, as the only effect of this motion would be to not allow slightly larger signs in large buildings in the industrial estate. I don't agree with that. I think it's perfectly reasonable to consider the size of building and bulk of building and the type of building and the environment, and to then, not only environment, trees and surrounds, and to consider that that is a perfectly reasonable place to have slightly larger signage. So I won't be supporting the motion, and I'll call it division. Thanks.
Jess?
Yeah, I'm very much on the fence here.
Oh, good, a 3-3.
Very, very much on the fence. I can be persuaded either way. Maybe someone's got a little piece of cake somewhere in the fridge, or
I've got some nice biscuits.
Status quo is right. Our sandwich boards were status quo, and they got tanked as well. So, it is in the industrial state. I agree. Things are running very well there at the moment. I think Jamie's got everything under control. I just need 30 more seconds.
I've just got Councillor Jury's a kid like that.
I'll wait to hear your reply, please, Councillor Wilkie.
All right, thank you, Jess.
Convince me. And if you've
Okay,
got better than
good.
cake, even
Was
better.
that your speech?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that all right? Or?
So look,
Yeah, just checking.
the whole thrust generally of these proposals is to minimise and reduce signage. This seems to be inconsistent with that. It's going the opposite directions. It's actually proposing to increase the amount of signage allowed on one individual sign. The other concern I have about it is it equitable to allow an individual sign faces in one precinct only to be larger than everywhere else in the Shire? And I suspect that it'll open the door to other businesses arguing that they should be allowed to have a similar increase in their individual sign faces as well. So there may be unintended consequences, is all I'm saying. So in summing up, it goes against the thrust of this policy, which is to minimise and reduce signage, and it's only being allowed in a very restricted area, so it's inequitable in that sense, and it may open the door to others wanting the same sort of latitude, and it could have unintended consequences for staff down the track. And also, the other point, we have the vast majority of businesses are already complying with the 4 square metre limit. So what is the problem we're trying to fix here if it is not an issue? I'm saying this, all we'll be doing today is ratifying the form of the draft policy to go out for public comment. If there is a big pushback for 6 square metres, we're going to have another debate, and we can rectify that later. And there may be a range of aspects to this particular policy that we're going to re-prosecute in a couple of months' time. So I ask you to support the amendment.
Smiling.
So I'll put the amendment. Those in favour? Those against? I do have the casting vote.
You do indeed, Chairperson.
So, in order to be consistent with the way I've voted on all the other issues today, I'll be supporting the amendment.
Declare it carried.
Just to reiterate, this is for public consultation and to our beloved viewers, right? This is going out to public consultation
Public comment, yeah.
and coming back. That's correct.
That's right.
Yep.
This
Yes.
is not.
Yeah, you get
It will be
another bite at the
re-prosecuted.
cherry.
Yeah.
Taking in
That's-
mind what the public
Is
feedback
Joe
is.
back on Thursday?
So,
I think we
so
might have
we
another
can-
bite.
We can bring
That's
sandwich
amendment
boards
is
back,
carried.
the
Frank.
amendment is carried.
Frank, we can bring sandwich boards back.
Becomes the
Passes by
motion.
the chair,
Yeah.
It becomes
Oh.
the motion.
People at the people.
Other
that speak.
other amendments can be moved today if any other councillors wish to move anyone.
Yeah, I'm going to move the one that's on the screen, which is a procedural matter to ensure that the CEO can make the relevant changes to the document before it goes out to public consultation.
Yes, second.
Seconded, Councillor Pardon.
I don't need to speak to it. No, it's very straightforward. I'll read it out though for the sake of those at home. To delegate authority to the Chief Executive Officer to make consequential and clarification changes to administration and other subordinate local law amendments, subordinate local law number 1, 2019, prior to consultation with state government agencies and public notification.
Any other questions or comments, councillors, on that amendment? I'll put the amendment. Those in favour? That's carried. Councillors, we have a motion before us, and Councillor Stockwell and Councillor Wellington have spoken to the motion. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah,
Councillor
I will, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, look, Mr. Chairman, the general thrust of the motion, I support the general thrust of the motion. The amendments that we've talked to, etc. A lot of stuff there's at the margins and various opinions of councillors, and that's fine. I think in the big picture, and that's what we're looking at here, to maintain fairly much the status quo. There is some changes there, but at the end of the day, in the big picture, what we're trying to achieve here with the local law gives us a bit more punch and strength to administer. I think it's cleaner that way rather than the old way within the planning scheme, etc., and a combination of both with regards to regulation. So in the big picture, you know, I'll go back to, you know, we live in the biosphere. I hear this more and more these days. Obviously there's some message getting out there, you get it in emails. No one knew what it was. They probably still don't, but they certainly talk about it these days. And this is just part of our, I suppose, in the big picture, keeping Noosa a little different. As Councillor Glasgow said before, different by nature. That's us. And it is a draft, and we'll see what comes back. And if changes are required, then council can take that on board and actually make those changes. But the cut and thrust, we live in a beautiful shire, and we know that, and we do have an obligation. So, I think all councillors realise, and the past councillors, and not only the councillors, but the general public, many people out there, they recognise that we have an obligation in the big picture to try and look after the place and tourism. This is a big part of it. Visitors, signage, etc. And without them, even though there's certain problems we might say, or people might say, that we have with the great influx of tourists that we do have. Without them, we'd be in a very poor state. So this will add to our visual amenity of the Shire, and in the big picture, I think it's good. So thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Yes,
Who else has spoken?
Big vote.
Has everyone else spoke?
No, Tony, Brian and Frank have spoken.
Only one side of the table.
Why don't you start this side? I like going last.
You like going last? Okay. Well, I will speak. Look, I'm generally very supportive of making sure that Noosa signage is well managed and that we don't have too much clutter, and that certainly we want to keep it a beautiful place. I also believe that it's important to be aware that signage has actually got a purpose. It's not just there to please or displease councillors and council. It's really about local businesses and ensuring signage is visible to passers-by and to drivers-by, and actually achieves the purpose, which is to alert people to what's there and to attract people to what's there. I'm very much looking forward to the feedback from the community, because I think this is what it's all about, and I think it'll be very important to hear what people have to say. And at the same time, being that I like to be consistent, I won't be supporting this this particular iteration because I think there's been a regression to a one-size-fits-all approach quite unnecessarily, because I do believe that certain buildings are very large and could quite reasonably be allowed a slightly larger sign. So I'm not going to support this, and so people know I haven't supported it, and I will call a division. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really all been said by all six of us. It's a hugely controversial issue, signs in Noosa. I think this is a great policy. It's come up with some good decisions today, although I'm a bit bummed about our A-frames. We'll go out to the public. I do like the way that it's the public consultation. It's going to go out and it's come back, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion about it then again. But yeah, I fully support what's the process that's been happening. And like I say, we are different by nature, and it does me so proud to go to these other places and come back here and see our beloved Shire just not caked in crappy signs. So I really appreciate the effort that Jamie and all you guys do, and I can't wait to have this policy concrete and see what happens in the next meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I too would like to start by complimenting the enormous amount of work the staff have done putting these recommendations together. I think it also takes into account the changing nature of the way we locate businesses. In the online space, people, before they set out, leave their homes or resorts or units, they do Google searches as to locate the type of businesses they want to find, and only need the signage when they get to the street to locate the business. And if you're a resident, you only need to find it once, and you know where it is from there on in. So, if anything, the need for signage is reducing over time, not getting bigger. So therefore, to my mind, signage doesn't need to become bigger or larger. It's actually, in fact, its need is reducing. So I think what the whole thrust of this policy reflects the changing times, and I think from an amenity perspective, Noosa will be the beneficiary. We're about to embark on a consultation process. It is a genuine conversation with the community where their feedback will be considered, and there could be changes made as a result of that. I think that because of one of the strengths of this council is it sees the community as a source of wisdom, knowledge, different ways of thinking. They're a resource to draw upon. They have a lot of knowledge, and they really help inform the direction of the council. Consultation process is genuine, and I'm looking forward to hearing and reading what comes back, and before determining the final shape of this policy. But it'll be done in collaboration with the community. Brian, do you wish to close?
Yes, but before I do, I normally write down all the things I disagree with to do in my closing speech, and I only had one here, and it was a question. When we said the current bylaw's silent on content, I thought I sent a player off on Friday night for using offensive, insulting and abusive language. Do we have any triggers in the bylaw that would allow us to control, if necessary, any signage that was objectionable in that regard?
I believe that is governed by, I don't know whether it's legislation or another body, but I can find out for you.
Yeah, maybe just for Thursday night, in case we have to slide something in there. Yep. Okay, now, and I think over the past 2 hours, 14 minutes and 36 seconds, we've well and truly identified one thing, and that's it, that all the people sitting around this table who get to vote are fairly unanimously in support of the broad general direction, continuing on the path of setting Noosa different by nature as a result of our signage policy. The differences we have are, as I think Councillor Parton mentioned, at the margin. We've got a few areas where some people think we've gone a little bit too hard, and others where we haven't gone a little bit far enough. I think that's good. I think we will soon find out if the lack of objection is reflective of a business community that also identifies with it. I would suggest that many of the business people in this shire have not been exposed to the story, have not been exposed to the 1983 studies or the 1988 sign policy that came in. And so it will be an education experience. I don't think it will be smooth sailing when this goes out. I think there will be a little bit of angst in the press. But I think when people understand why we do it and what the outcome of being tough on signs, I think it's great. I recently went on holidays, and the only time I took a picture of a streetscape was when it was really obvious that they had really strict sign policy, because it actually added to the experience as a tourist of that place. And I think that's where we have to get to, is it's your ability to attract people through signage is a result of design, not as a result of the number of signs or the size of signs. And I think this bylaw will hopefully push people to start thinking that way. So I will support the motion as I move it, and I will support it as amended, as was obvious. The final one, I think, is if we stick with situation normal, that's good. But I actually was convinced by Councillor Parton in our earlier dealings that in the industrial estate it may be worth considering bulk and scale, but we can see what the feedback is on that.
Put the motion. Those in favour? That's Wellington, Stockwell, Parton, Glasgow and Wilkie. Those against? Agreed. Thank you. Councillors, I want to call a 5-minute recess.
That's a very good decision.
Okay.
No, it's all right.
It's a rare privilege to get to vote against you and Frank.
Is it on?
Rare privilege, what?
Vote against you.
Righto. Okay, welcome back. Declare the meeting open again. The next item is the Noosa Sustainability Institute report, referred from the Planning and Environment Committee. And we've got Kim Rollins here. Hello, Kim.
Hello, Frank.
Our viewers can't see you there. Our viewers, I know you're still there. Okay.
Doesn't matter, they're all asleep after the last one.
Right. All right. Questions for Kim? Ingrid.
Question, and Kathy, could you pop up the slide that I called original stages? Oh, that's one. Yeah, thank you. Kim, I noticed that in the report produced by CSIRO, that report refers to the original stages of this project, which were given to us in October 2017. And I know that we approved the first stage for 38,900, but there are further stages about developing the institute concept for 44,000, and then stage 3, a business case for 45,000. Can you just sort of update us on where we are up to now, and also what you are proposing in relationship to these other 2 stages and the costs of those?
Yeah, sure. So the outcome of this report refers only to stage 1. So we're at stage 1. You will recall that in the original decision to proceed with investigating this concept, it was proposed to break down the investigation process into 3 stages. So it allowed council to evaluate what came out of each stage. This is the outcome of stage 1 only, and the report's actually recommending not to proceed to stage 2 as proposed by CSIRO in the original form that they proposed, but rather proposes some further work as outlined in the recommendation, which is a further phase of investigation, I guess, but it's not proposing or not recommending to move to stage 2 as originally proposed in the CSIRO proposal.
Well, thank you. Okay. I also have another question. The CSIRO have suggested, after all their research, that there are 3 types of sustainability institutions which exist in the world, and they put forward those 3 options. Can you explain those 3 options, and also how your recommendation relates to those or differs from those?
Sure. The work undertaken through the CSIRO investigation looked at 3 types of institutes and case studied a large number of types of institutes across the globe and nationally, and they looked at what they termed university-led institutes, community-led institutes, and then like a business based institute, and categorised each of their case studies into which one of those types of models, I guess, each of the institutes fell within. That work then informed, I guess, a range of models that they felt could be pursued by Noosa Council if we were deciding to advance the idea of an institute, and proposes then 3 models of varying levels of sort of complexity and investment. During that process and into the last few months of last year, it became very evident that there is already a range of activity and investment and institutes and organisations working in Noosa and in the region that are pursuing the sorts of outcomes that this original concept was trying to achieve. So it was through that process, so I guess the case study process and the stage 1 analysis that CSIRO did, and then some substitute work that we've done internally that's looking at work that's already happening in the municipality and surrounds, where we've actually come to I guess a proposal that let's not pursue the idea of the institute per se as it was originally intended at this stage, but let's spend some more time, I guess, using the roles that we have as council in terms of facilitating and connecting and coordinating, given what we now know is happening across the municipality. And you'll see in the attachment too, we've outlined just a sample of the energy and activity that's happening across the Shire, and that's not exclusive. No doubt there's more. That was only, you know, some work we did, but it was enough to say there's already many organisations and institutes and local communities and individuals who are currently investing time, energy, money in seeking to address the types of issues that we were wanting to address. So we might be better at this stage to connect those organisations, have a deeper look into what those organisations are looking to address, and put together a coordinated effort, understand that better first, collate all the effort that's happening, all the research that's happening, and make that more accessible, and then take another look at that point about what that tells us and what gaps there might be before we proceed.
Tony?
I'd like to move the staff recommendation as a motion. Thanks.
I'll move Councillor Wellington, seconded Councillor Pardon.
Happy for more questions if people want to ask more questions.
So you're not speaking to the motion?
You want me to speak now?
Go.
Okay. Look, we only paid for the first stage of the CSIRO investigation, and although we waited quite a long time for the delivery of the outcome of that investigation, it has in the interim allowed all sorts of interesting developments to occur in the Shire. That includes Earth Tech at Peregian Digital Hub, the University of the Sunshine Coast CIDSL, or Centre for International Development, Social Entrepreneurship and Leadership, has appeared at the J. Zen Inc. now have a shopfront presence in Noosa Junction. There's a possible deal being mooted between Noosa Council and CQU through an MOU process. There's been a shift in focus very much by Tourism Noosa towards sustainability in the last year and a half. And also the arrival of the Sustainable Planet Institute and a whole lot more. So one thing that great that has come out of this decision to engage CSIRO is it's kind of focused Council's attention on this area in a very real and tangible way towards a range of possibilities. And in that regard, I do want to thank Kim Rawlings in particular and her staff, but particularly Kim, who's very much driven this investigation, kept it on track, and done a fantastic job in spite of her massive workload. So thanks to Kim. As the motion notes, there is more work to do by Council. This is mostly acting as a sort of a conduit or facilitator, connecting all these different parties that have been identified, making sure that they're aware of each other for a start, because a lot of them aren't. Secondly, to ensure that where possible they work in tandem and make sure they complement each other rather than collide or compete with each other. And I think Council has a very opportune role there to ensure that all the different people who are working to advance sustainability in this area and globally are working harmoniously and are aware of each other's presence and what's going on, and that can only be to the benefit of the organisations themselves as well as our residents. So in the short term, whilst we're not necessarily creating or building a Noosa Sustainability Institute, the idea might simply be a virtual institute, maybe a web presence, but certainly some sort of portal that keeps all these different groups connected, and I think that's a fabulous outcome.
Some questions.
Sure.
You can ask first, then I'll speak.
Kathy, could you pop up that one called council roles? And I think I've already heard more or less the answer to this, but I think it's worth looking at. Right from the start, when we were brought into our first induction program, there was an encouragement to be aware of different levels of roles of council. Going from recognizing people and efforts to advocating about issues, to enabling things to happen, to partnering, or to delivering. So those are sort of the hierarchy. So I'm just thinking, Kim, what are you recommending, where does your recommendation fit into this hierarchy for what we might do now?
Sure. Before I answer that directly, we also work with 3 other roles, and you'll see them come through the environment strategy, a range of documents. Now we'll include lead, facilitator, and planner. I guess the recommendation or the way forward is that council enable and facilitate a level of coordination to connect up all the effort that's happening at the moment. So it really probably sits in enable.
Yeah.
It may lead to partner, but at this stage it sits in the enable. Yeah.
Definitely not deliver.
It's not deliver at
Thank
this
you.
point, no.
Thank you. And I do have another question. The report by CSRO had an ethics declaration notice which told people that if they were interviewed, they may end up being, and their names may end up in the report, so people would know who was interviewed. And I noticed that some community members were interviewed, but we have not been told who they are. Can you tell us who was interviewed?
Yes, I can. So you'll recall that stage 1 actually didn't include community consultation. Stage 2 was if council proceeded, was really, stage 1 was really about an investigation and analysis of case studies. But as we went through that process, and with you'll see in the report that there was a number of internal workshops with a number of people across the organisation who are undertaking research or trying to address these challenges at the moment, and a range of questions were coming out through that process around how this concept would relate to other organisations in the community that are happening at the moment. So to, I guess, assist the process, and to CSIRO, who didn't have a local presence here, I guess, it was felt valuable for them to at least talk to a couple of key organisations at my request, even though it wasn't part of the brief. So there were only a few organisations spoken to. So there was representatives from Tourism Noosa, given that it was changing its sort of mandate, it felt appropriate to speak to Tourism Noosa. Representatives from the biosphere, Noosa Biosphere, and Michael Tarrant. CCIQ. Yeah. So it was Dick Barnes and Karen Hussey and Michael Tarrant and the former CEO at the time of Tourism Noosa, Damien Massingham.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. I also have a funny little question. When I was reading the report, it refers to the USC Sustainability Center has in the past been a good example of a university-led model. And I was a bit surprised by the words "in the past."
Do you want me to speak to that?
Tony could speak to that, yeah, if you want to.
I was discussing the Sustainability Centre with senior staff only a fortnight ago, and it is not the same. It is not receiving the same level of university support as it has done in the past. You may know that Professor Tim Smith no longer heads it. It is in a sort of hiatus a bit at the moment, where they're reconsidering what direction it may have. So I in fact suggested that the words "in the past" be included rather than now, because it's not quite doing today what it was doing a few years ago.
Yes, and staff also involved in doing some of that work looked into that, and they was set up as a particular way, but they are transitioning. So it was, I guess it was to reflect that. It was a good example of a university-led model at the time, but it is transitioning.
Oh, thank you for explaining. I also have a couple of questions about the actual recommendation wording. Under C, where it says undertake further engagement and consultations with key local organizations, institutions, community members and experts. The word local is there, and I noticed though that at the same time the institutions that were listed in the report, some of which included people that perhaps, or organizations that perhaps were not local, like UQ, or like even UCS is not local to Noosa. So I'm wondering, is that word local limiting us to everyone just being local?
Look, as it's my resolution, my motion, I should talk to that, if you don't mind. and I don't see it as being an either-or situation. It does commit us to dealing with what's on the ground locally in Noosa, but it certainly doesn't exclude the opportunity to go beyond Noosa and talk to other institutions or organisations.
Or even to involve them in the
The motion does not suggest that it's
doesn't
exclusive.
suggest exclusion, because I feel, well, okay, I shouldn't speak to my thoughts. So. Other question I have actually is, it's still in C, and it says engaging in consultation with these groups in this space to advance the idea, but it doesn't actually say what the idea is. So I'm wondering what advance the idea really means.
Again, I see that as advancing the idea of a sustainability institute.
So you're looking at the idea of a sustainability institute as being deliver, not just coordinate and facilitate and connect. Is that what you're looking at?
Well, we're getting to semantics here. It may be that the delivery is simply the coordination process.
Oh, okay.
If it ends up being a virtual institute that's simply a web portal, then you know the delivery is connecting people.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm okay with that then. Yeah. That's good. Thank you very much. Oh, I had one more question. Sorry. It says, and further, Tony, further identify activity and research what should be captured. But I noticed in the maybe
The supplement.
Sorry, Kathy, there is one other one that I have as a slide, which is the little arrows. What are they called? New stages. New stages. That one, yeah. It's a bit hard to see. If you can make it bigger, that would be helpful. But the wording in there I rather like in the first stage, and that is engage scope. Hang on, there's something there. Oh, engage to inform development of strategic agenda for future research and action is in there. And it's not reflected in the wording in the motion, which says identify activity and research to be captured. So I just wondered, yeah.
Look, I think you may be getting a bit too prescriptive in terms of the wording of the motion. The motion's intent is that there is more work to do by council, and that will involve, you know, looking at what's available, etc., etc.
Okay.
And again, we're not excluding any activity at all. It's simply to acknowledge that we have more work to do, and that it will come back to council when we've done that further work.
And I guess section 4 in the report unpacks the resolution a bit more with the actions, which does in the new report.
Yeah, and I guess related to all of this is a question, and that is that, as we're saying here, we would endorse the activity. Is there a budget attached to this activity?
No, at this point, it's not proposed that there were any further financial allocation. But we, particularly in my department, directorate, and more broadly across the organisation, are seeing a whole lot of synergies with a range of other work that we've got going on, including some of the new strategic documents that are coming to the environment strategy, the implementation of the local economic plan. I point to Anthony. Sorry. So there's synergy with the work we're doing now. So we propose that this work be done in-house and is aligned with the work that we're doing over the next few months in terms of better understanding what's happening locally and creating these connections to address the outcomes that, I guess the environment strategy, for instance, is seeking to achieve, and some of those other broader strategies.
So it's existing staff time, not specific budget.
Not budget.
And currently no budget for the portal, even though
we haven't determined to do that yet.
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
we'll do some scoping of that and bring that back to you.
Okay, lovely. But that's all my questions, so perhaps I'll spep to the motion.
Well, I think Frank had his hand up.
Oh,
to
I'm happy.
speak.
Yeah, you speak.
All right,
Yeah.
I don't care. I'm
Yeah,
busy.
yeah.
Councillors, support the motion, of course, before us here, and even some of the questions from Councillor Jackson there. It's the journey. It's the journey we're on. It's it's a big journey. If we think back, way back when I looked at page 7 of the report, benefits to Noosa, that could bring. And things that I read here with regards to reinforce Noosa's brand as a leader of sustainability, raise the profile of Noosa, potentially attract highly qualified professionals and their families into Noosa, potentially from all over the world. Seed an innovative startup community focused on sustainability technologies and solutions. Well, we've been doing a bit of that as well, a la Rufus Street at Perigium. And already we've seen the seeds that we've put out there growing everywhere. And talk about seeds, when you see the amount of collaborative, we want to be collaborative with all those different institutes, whether it's universities, groups, smart people, if you like, the amount out there, it's terrific. So we're at a beginning. I think it's a good step, and I'm keen to keep going, following this process. Step one, if you like, in the report, where we have a portal here, online presence, and we can gather. It's interesting that, because we've got that much information all over the place from that many groups. So where's the repository? How do we capture that in one particular area? And then everyone can go to that repository, and there it all is. So I think it's terrific. And while reading in the introduction here, while the federal and state governments can provide and input guidance on sustainability measures, the true leadership needs to come from local councils and communities, where on the ground sustainability efforts can achieve the greatest outcomes. And if ever I've been saying this all my life, with regards to CSIRO, etc., who I have the greatest respect for, have solved that many problems for this nation over way back to war days, etc., or when they were first conceived. You give CSIRO a problem, they usually can solve it. So I have that respect for them. And to have them involved going forward, and we had them in the Shire, actually, at Cooroy. They'd set up there to look at timber and uses, etc. So I never want to get too far away from them again. If we have opportunity to work with them and the universities, etc., etc. One thing I thought we might be able to do, where we talk about in the report, enhance science, technology, English, arts and maths, STEAM, activities with local schools. And I thought going forward, Noosa Council might have a look at some sort of bursary that we could put up, you know, the best scientific kid, something like that. I think down the track we should have a look at creating something like that to help an individual or a few individuals go through uni, etc. I think that'd be a good thing, and sets a bit of a platform as well. I mean, you know, backing up your young people that are actually going to benefit us in the future, I think maybe something we can look at. But certainly I was excited when I went through the report. The biosphere, my councillor Stockwell was a member of the biosphere right back, and when it was discussed that we should have a look at getting an Institute of Sustainability in Noosa, and that's a huge call. It's pretty massive. So I think when you go through the reports, that you once again back to the journey. You ain't going to do this in 5 minutes. This is a big deal. But let's work along, and over the years and time, see where we end up. But I think it's a terrific start. And thank you, Kim, and staff for the work.
Ingrid.
Yes, well, I would like to also thank you for what you've done in terms of analysis here. I think the key statement in your report, which I shall read, is that there is already a significant amount of activity, investment, research and action occurring around sustainability, and that what is lacking is coordination of this effort, collation of data and research, shared access to research and outcomes, and clear strategic directions and strategic identification of key sustainability challenges, and a broader general awareness of these. I think what you've done with your analysis is gap analysis, and you've identified, and we can be very heartened, as Councillor Pardon says, that there is so much activity. And the reason I put up that hierarchy of council roles, I very much support council being an enabler. And I think that we've identified the fact that there are a lot of organizations doing their own thing, but they can get a lot of benefit by there being a central agency that is just facilitating synergy and information and communication, so that they can actually perhaps benefit and prioritize better what they're working on and get some assistance with it. So I'm actually very supportive of the idea of being a facilitator, a connector, a coordinator, and collating things and playing that sort of glue role. And I think that, to me, in terms of ratepayers' money, I think that's what council is about. I mean, I don't think we should be pretending we're suddenly researchers or a university, or that would be going too far. We've got those experts around, and why not somehow bring them together and capitalize on that. So I'm really happy with what's proposed, and certainly support the idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting how this particular topic has evolved. I remember back in the early days of the biosphere, where Ben McMullen, the then environment manager, worked with a number of universities looking at bricks and mortar down near the J. And I think where we got to now is realising that perhaps our needs are not necessarily requiring bricks and mortar, that what we really need is a relationship-based approach to sustainability research. And at the end of what I'm going to say, I'm actually going to suggest we don't call it an institute. I think my own trip through this maze is probably important in that where I got to is that to address sustainability problems is the old way of doing science is largely outdated. I looked at the concepts of post-normal science, where the problems are so current, are so complex, that if you wait until you have full scientific certainty using normal statistics, you're likely to have missed the opportunity to actually affect the change you want. I look at participative action research, and when I look at the list of potential collaborative interests in this space in the report, I can see that as being the real opportunity. We have to decide, you're saying there's no council investment. I don't think that we will get the maximum benefit at this stage unless we do consider why council wants to invest. The easy one, as mentioned, is there's a whole lot of utilitarian types of research that will help council do its job better to meet the current challenges in front of us. But it is also important to understand that if you want to lead, you need to attract the best minds. We can't possibly, in a small organisation that we have all the knowledge about all the opportunities that lay ahead for us to leapfrog current understanding into what might get us to the future quicker. And so to me, having a coordination role is really important. Part of my own, I mentioned, I was quite chuffed to see that there's still a thing called the Permaculture Research Institute of the Sunshine Coast. I'm sitting here because I was the initial coordinator of the Permaculture Institute of Taunton, which probably went to that. It was a plum job. I got a block of land with a dam, no power, no water, and a Bondwood caravan. 32 years later, I finished my PhD that had a strong flavour on sustainable agroecology at the Sustainability Research Centre, which is mentioned here. And I think that's one of the reasons why you do it. You do want to attract both young minds, and you want to attract the leaders in the field to focus on the issues for our shire. And unless you create the environment, the collective or the collaboration, which creates the melting pot where these people are attracted, both investors and deliverers, you won't get there. So to me, that's really important. When I started my PhD, I actually had an offer from a Sandstone, from Griffith, and what was then called the Institute of Sustainability, Health and Regional Engagement on the Sunshine Coast. And it was because the Sunshine Coast set that Sustainability Research Centre saying it wants to address the problem of its own regions that I chose that one, and not the more prestigious ones. And I think that's what we can have a look at, is what is it that will attract people to our shire that will help us answer those questions? So we've talked about what we possibly could do. I used to coordinate the Mary River Researchers Forum biennially, which would bring all the people who've done research in the Mary River to address their issues and get the people who might likely to use it to say, oh, what does this mean for us? You know, we used to bring scientists from overseas and then discuss it with, so it's that participative action research, things that answer the problems in front of us that I think we should be looking at. I should something way back. I want to put a place on record that I could have been involved in the biosphere much longer than I actually was. Because the first time I was asked to stand, Councillor Pardon moved the motion not to accept the Environment Sector Board's recommendation. But we'll bygones be bygones.
And you can see why.
So I finished. I said I was going to finish about what we call it. And part of my research is about the small world network theory, about when you create a rich node that people want to connect to, that all of a sudden it starts to influence the whole system. And to me, I think what we call it going forward is a sustainability research hub, not the institute. Institute's an old-fashioned thinking.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
No, it's all been said, Frank.
Councillor Wellington, you wish to close?
Oh, very briefly and amusingly, I'm fascinated that Councillor Stockwell says he's only here because of the Tewantin Permaculture Group. Seems they kept Brian alive somehow, and I'm going to take that up with them and find out what their elixir of life is. He also cited that he was involved in agro something, which probably explains the ants in his pants. I'm not sure what aggressive tactics Councillor Stockwell was referring to, but look, all jokes aside.
I thought it was a Sesame Street character.
A drummer.
Sustainability agriculture then.
Councillor Stockwell suggests there was no council investment at this point in time. In fact, there is. There's considerable investment, obviously, by staff. There's considerable investment by councillors now thinking around this issue. And there will be considerable investment if it requires funding down the track. We can look at it either in terms of next year's budget, or if it needs to be beforehand, we might be able to find something in a budget review. But basically, we are, as has been suggested, on a path, and it's fantastic that we are on that path and that we're all committed to that particular direction. So I thank all my fellow councillors for that.
Thank you, Tony. We'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against, the motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Kim. Next item, report Director General Committee, which is the request for a negotiated decision notice for multiple housing type 4 conventional 17 dwelling units at 25 Kauri Street, Cooroy. Page 3 of the General Committee agenda. Welcome, Patrick.
Okay.
Councillors, do you have any?
I'll put the motion.
I'll second it.
Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Wellington. You wish to speak to the motion?
I will briefly. I'd like to say that I'm really happy with the outcome, because I think it's a fair and reasonable thing that the developer who's working on 25 Kauri Street doesn't have to upgrade things in front of 21 Kauri Street, but only has to do the appropriate work relating to the curb and culvert. So I'm really satisfied that the applicant went through a negotiation decision process, that they put forward an engineering drawing, and that has been a satisfactory solution here. Thank you.
The other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Just to say that when this came up, it was noted that this is the opportunity to create some affordable housing in Cooroy, and I think what the staff report has suggested is that they've come up with an alternative solution that doesn't adversely affect the actual achievement of the stormwater system or the road network. So while we're reducing the costs, which will help hopefully be passed on to the future owners in terms of the purchase price, we aren't placing any greater impost on the local residents in terms of stormwater or safety on the roads.
You wish to close? No. I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Yes.
Against? The motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. We move to the next item 4 in the agenda, which is Planning and Environment Court Appeal number 4339 218 development approval for operational works signage at 140, 142 Eumundi, Noosa Road, Noosaville.
Can't get away from signing.
Signs.
Oh, there we are again. If I understand correctly, the applicant has agreed to these conditions.
Yep.
No one else will, I'll move it.
Councillor
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Glasgow. Speak to it, Councillor.
No, thanks.
No.
The other councillors wish to speak to the motion. Those in favour?
Yep.
Against, motion's carried.
Thanks,
Thank you, Patrick.
Nice
Thank you,
work,
Kim.
Patrick.
Next up, we have the financial report for April 2019 by Trent. Here he is. Councillors, questions for Trent?
Oh yeah, I have a question.
Ingrid.
A couple of questions. On page 18 under operating revenue, I noticed that general rates and tourism levy are below budget, below it. Can you explain that? Because I would have thought those were things that were totally predictable. Why would they be below budget?
At the start of the financial year, Councillor, we make an estimate of any potential growth in and obviously evaluation flow through impacts on our rates. For the general rate this year, we had one of our larger commercial ratepayers question their valuation through state government, and you're seeing the flow through impact of that come through in the financial statements year to date. Now we do as we get towards the end of the financial year, we put a supplementary rate run through so you might find that variance might decrease marginally as we get the 30th of June.
Okay, so it's just estimate versus reality.
Yes.
Thank you. Also, I noticed that waste management contract services are below year-to-date budget. And I'm wondering about that one too, because it was, again, seemed predictable, so I'm surprised it's below budget.
Some elements of the waste contract are obviously driven by volumes, take up of green waste services, timing of contracts for crushing of our concrete, timing of mulch, the mulching services. So the bulk of the variation you'll find year to date is in those crushing and mulching services over this year.
Thank you.
I have a question about page 18 also, interest received, investment revenue 125,000 above year-to-date budget. Do the interest rates change? And why would there be that variance? I mean, it's good, but why?
The main reason we're obviously generating more revenue than what we anticipate is due to the timing of the capital works program. So more money in the bank than what we expected for this time of year. As projects are unfortunately delayed, obviously it works in our favour to some extent because it's more cash in the bank invested. The second part of the question about the interest rates, they do move. It's obviously hedged to market movements. We actually have seen a decline in interest rates over the last 3 months, moving down slowly. We've been quite fortunate that the funds that we've invested at the moment are either fixed in term deposits for a 12-month period, which means they're generating quite a good return compared to what's being offered now currently, and QTC is still offering good rates to us above what the commercial banks are offering. So we are in a bubble where we're doing quite well in terms of just that timing of those term deposits.
Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind with our interest is that we model our interest revenue for the budget 18 months ago, and we assume in our model that we're spending, as Trent just mentioned, we're spending our what we need to deliver services, capital and operating. So as soon as we don't spend things like levies, if we have levies that are unspent, which we do, we have had, i.e. environment levy, heritage levy, that cash is sitting constrained. However, we're still allowed to make money on that, so we invest it. So we're always going to probably be conservative with our interest revenue budget, so we can use it to fund new emergent stuff through the year in budget reviews, or even put some in the kitty at year end. So it's a good buffer. It's fairly standard for local government to underestimate their interest revenue. I'd rather do that than overestimate, and then
I keep on trying to reduce that levy interest, but
I just had a question on page 19, and it's about the waste education program, which is 66,000 below year-to-date budget. And I'm just thinking, we have a waste reduction and recycling plan, and I would have thought education was a very important element here. So I'm just wondering if you know why it's so. It seems quite a bit below.
I would suggest we take that on notice and get
Yeah,
the
it's
relevant
good, 'cause
director to answer that.
That was my question too. It appears to be a priority that we need to look at.
Trent, can you get Wayne to
Sure.
send that out?
I'll ensure the response comes through without tomorrow on that one.
Brian.
Yeah, for the purposes of consistency and the absence of councillor Jerusalem.
Staff training.
I know that staff training is underspent by 45k, noting that a further 58k is committed, but will that take us up so that we're fairly close to budget in staff training by the end of the financial year, Mr. CEO?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Brian Jerusalem. You'll see in the report that we've got the training budget where it will be fully expended by 30 June. We changed about how we manage that, and we're on track.
One more.
Yes, Ingrid.
Page 20, I think I know the answer, but I better ask it. And that's about development assessment legal appeals, 110,000 above year-to-date budget. Can you explain, please?
So we set a forecast at the start of the year as to what our cost of our legal appeals for development applications are, both in terms of legal costs and consulting. Flowing through the numbers this month is the BR3 adjustment, so we did actually reassess where we thought our legal appeals would be, bearing in mind this is a piece of work we do in March, April, like early April. So we had taken up an extra few $100,000 in legal costs, BR3, but they're higher again. So we've had more of that come through. It's year to date. Some of that may be timing in terms of when those legal costs are incurred. We have to take that on notice and discuss that with the development assessment manager.
There was a case, you might recall the Kenyon case, which is the one on David Lowe Way with that subdivision just near Castaway at the top of the hill there. So that's just finished a 2-week hearing, and there's only one more day to go, and then we'll go into judgment. So that's the main one that will be affecting us.
Yeah, these are guesstimates. Guessing.
Original.
Yeah. Started.
And if we'll be looking at what we set aside in the coming financial year.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Someone move it.
I'll move it.
Oh, I'll second it.
Seconded, Councillor Jackson. Any councillors wish to speak to this? Congratulations.
Thanks.
Trent, Michael, very responsible financial management. Underpins everything we do, enables us to maintain a very ambitious program, operating and capital and services. So thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? I put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Okay, come to the item 6, Queensland Treasury Corporation review of council liquidity. Right. Trent. Tony.
I'd like to move it. Thanks.
Second.
Tony, seconded Councillor Pardon. Tony, wish to speak to it?
Yeah. Look, if ever there was a clear demonstration of this council's excellent fiscal management, this is it today. And this is kind of slipping through at the rear end of our general committee agenda, but it's actually a very significant moment in terms of this council's financial history. It received a sort of, what we're agreeing to today has received a kind of imprimatur, if you like, from Queensland Treasury Corporation in terms of their review of our liquidity. And what it means is that we'll be paying a large amount of our historic debt that we inherited at de-amalgamation. That debt being historic is at a far higher interest rate than would be the case today should we take on similar debt today. Paying it down not only makes good sense, it's also a fantastic saving for our residents. Notwithstanding the fact there are some costs in paying it down, but overall it's still a significant win in terms of the outgoings of this council. We'll get much better bang for buck paying off that inherited loan than we would if we simply continued to invest the 10 million that we're looking to pay off in interest-bearing deposits. So again, I say it makes good financial sense, and it still leaves us with a $10 million buffer for emergency purposes, etc. So it's not like we're cleaning out the piggy bank. I just want to point out that during the debate over the de-amalgamation in the lead up to the 2013 referendum, there was an incredible scare campaign used suggesting that Noosa rates would skyrocket, that the new Noosa Council would be financially bankrupt or a basket case. And of course, there are still some detractors of council that continue to assert that Noosa Council's financially moribund. But today's decision is clear evidence of a well-managed and financially sound council. Not only have we been able to keep rate rises to at or below CPI over the last 5 years, but we've also improved services from the services that were being offered under the amalgamated council. And on top of that, we're in a strong financial position that allows us to pay off this historic high interest debt. Today, Noosa ratepayers enjoy lower rates than if they were still on the Sunshine Coast Amalgamated Council. They enjoy a responsive council that I would argue is more transparent, more communicative and more responsive, and that provides better service, as I say, and that now offers ongoing financial security, and that security is evident in the decision we're making here. Thank you.
Frank?
Yeah, I'd just like to endorse the Mayor's comments there and thank staff, Michael and staff, for a terrific outcome here. The opportunity for a council to pay back $10 million, who's been prudent for a lot of years, this money doesn't just drop into your lap without being very prudent. And so at the end of the day, to be paying off 10 million at 6.2%, whatever we're up 6.29, we're up for, and we can reborrow around 2.5, 2.7, depending on the time of loan, etc., going forward from the QTC. So on that equation, financially, why wouldn't you pay it off? For me, it's a no-brainer. But in the big picture, across the nation, we see councils in debt. We see big governments in debt, state governments in debt. And yes, we're in debt for about 35 million, and we're going to knock that off, 10 million off it. So when they're going, big governments are going down the gurgler, increasing debt, here's a council knocking off a third of its debt. So once again, thank the staff, CEO, etc., and councillors here and councillors before that were here before when we de-amalgamated. And the Mayor was right. The naysayers said we would be a basket case, and I think going forward with the $10 million surplus that we'll still have, we can build future surpluses going forward, especially when looking at our businesses and opportunities to grow our own businesses rather than rely on rate revenue, grant revenue. Because as we all know, as I've mentioned before, if the big governments are going down the gurgler financially, there's a risk to councils. And thus, paying 10 million and being in a small debt and reducing your principal repayments also is part of your business and lessens your risk going forward. So I think we'll keep looking for them opportunities. Council owns land across the Shire. It has opportunity. It already purchases land. It has other opportunities to purchase and grow its own business, whether it's caravan parks, camping grounds, etc., etc. So while building the pie, income, if you like, with one hand and reducing your debt with the other, man, that's a very good way to go and shows this council is very prudent and very strong and makes some pretty good decisions. Thank you.
Brian, then.
I've got a question to start off with. A few people have mentioned naysayers at the time of amalgamation, or de-amalgamation, sorry. The CEO and the director may recall that there was one Treasury organisation, I'm not sure if it's Queensland Treasury Corporation or the department more generally, that did a model that sort of conflicted with two people with local government experience who assisted modelling for the Free Noosa movement. Is this the same corporation that did that modelling, and if so, can we be happy they got it right this time?
Yes, it is, and yes, you can.
Nicely answered.
I do so because I think there's really important to understand that since this council was reconstituted, I think leading up to last year's budget, a minimum general rate had gone up cumulatively 17% less than to our neighbours to the south. So that was one of the points that the Mayor mentioned, that we've been able to achieve this despite a disputed lack of return of development contributions of many millions of dollars, to be able to 5 years in pay off a debt at a high interest rate for $10 million. Part of the reason we've done it is so that not just that we've done it with low rates, is we've been able to, the organisation and the staff have very effectively gone out to get grants. And I think once again at the time of the last budget, I think I worked out that the grants we got for the previous year equated to a rate rise of about 10%. So it is a really good example of what effective financial management can do. So I've been thinking long and hard of what to say to those doomsayers at the time of de-amalgamation, some of which still have the view, and my insightful PhD tells me there's only one word, and it's ha!
Don't get technical, Brian. Ingrid.
I actually have a question, and I think you may have answered this once before, but I'm going to have forgotten. We have a loan here, which is the historic loan relating to the de-amalgamation, $27 million, which is currently bearing the interest of 6.29%. And meanwhile, the money that we hold is not earning, I don't know, it's earning between 2 and 3% interest. New borrowings, according to your report, would only be about 2.7% or 2.3%, depending on how long they are for. Why is it that if we've got $20 million in reserves as a surplus, we're not actually paying off a bit more of that 27 million, which is at 6.29%, and then considering that we could re-borrow in need at a lower rate? Why are we limiting our paying off to 10 million?
I'll answer that, Councillor. So the initial piece of modelling work we did with Queensland Treasury, they obviously identified that we had a $20 million surplus of cash above what we need. So they have modelled that we still keep enough cash to keep afloat between both rate periods, plus a 3-month buffer. We call that a rate coverage buffer. But over the 10-year cycle, they forecasted that remaining 10 mil, based on our current projections, would dwindle down. So if we aggressively use up that entire buffer and we have an unexpected, it could be we need to fund the other 50% of a project. It could be a disaster, emergent disaster, or any kind of situation like that where we need to instantly access a larger bundle of cash than what we need. We also have the uncertainty of what the market will do in the sector in terms of interest rates, which also look good right now, may not be in the same position in 3 to 6 months' time. So the conservative position is initially now, in June 2019, to pay a portion of that off, and we can reassess the position in 6 or 12 months' time, and each year we come to the budget process and actually reassess what our equity and our debt should look like to make sure that what we're looking at is the current set of forecast financials in terms of capital, in terms of what the market's doing, in terms of what our spend is, what milestone projects we've taken on board. So we will reassess it in 12 months' time as part of the budget.
Thank you.
Question. When Noosa Council reconstituted in January 2014, what debt did it inherit? What was its debt level today? day one?
It was, I think, smack on 40 million.
40 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So from that day onwards, Noosa Council has consistently reduced its debt, its net debt, and also the report talks about cash at hand. Two times a year after the rates are collected, about 80 or 90 million cash at hand, and that comes down over time. That includes constrained funds like levies and funds are used for wages and capital works, things like that. So the 20 million free cash that we're talking about is cash that is unconstrained. That is, it's not linked to any particular project or levy, or it's free cash, and that's 10 million of that is what we intend to use to pay off some of this inherited debt, which was locked in at a very high interest rate, over 6%. Can you tell us, by doing that, we're actually creating a saving for an ongoing annual saving for ratepayers. Can you tell us what that is, please, and what that works out to be?
So with that remaining $27 million loan we have, there's 7 years left on that loan. So for the next 7 years, we'll save the net saving on interest between what we invest, what we pay. Next year it's $270,000 based on what the rates are at the moment. So if the market continues to drop and the interest rates continue to drop, as we move through into next year it might be larger, but at this point in time, $270 per year.
Yeah, ongoing.
For
the next 7
Which
years.
is equivalent to 0.6% rate.
Correct.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, does that take into consideration the fact that we no longer have the money in the bank earning interest?
Correct, yes.
It does?
Yes. So it's the net difference between what we're earning at 2.3 to 2.4% if it's a term deposit versus the 6.29% we were paying.
So if you have a look at the bottom of page 30, that's that table there, it really sets that out.
Yeah. So even though Noosa Council inherited the debt, our cash at bank has always been greater than debt.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. There's always been a very liquid council from day one.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak to the
Well,
motion?
actually, I'd like to say that similarly to what has already been said, that I think that the fact that we have in reserve 20 million in addition to all the other money we need and have to hold for various reasons demonstrates good financial management. And I actually think it makes a lot of economic sense to pay off some of that high interest loan. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, because obviously if we can save money on the loans that we're paying off, so much the better. So yeah, look, I think it's probably council can be congratulated as well as staff for, well, certainly for your good advice and for good money management. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say, basically reiterate the exact same things as my colleagues have said. And unlike Councillor Pardon's always saying looking forward, this is a perfect example about looking back and just about how good a job you guys have done in the past to get us in a situation. And for once we can say looking back instead of looking forward, and now we can be in a situation and say let's look forward, because you're right, we're paying off this huge debt and it's putting us in such a tremendous situation and position, and people forget we are still a very new little council, and if we're running like a business, we're leaps and bounds in front, and the CEO always reminds us, doesn't he? If we had these policies at 20 or 30 years under our belt, which we don't, we have 6 or whatever years. So it's just a big thank you to you two, and especially to your team. Nothing else must be said.
Councillor Tony, you wish to close?
Only for some thank yous, and of course thank you to our fantastic financial services staff, and Michael Shave in particular, who's been a rock through the last 5 years. I also want to acknowledge the efforts of my predecessor, Mayor Noel Playford, in setting up a new council on a really solid footing that was certainly far from extravagant, and has allowed us to in fact build upon the foundations that he created during his mayoralty.
Thank you. Put the motion, those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Trent. Call the meeting to a close. Thank you, councillors, for your patience.